I already laughing? Oh my god. Okay, no joke. This is not how I intended to start this video. Why? I don't even know why I'm laughing. Probably just because I'm already feeling the ridiculousness. Maybe that's it. So, hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari-chan. And I don't know what's wrong with me right now. But welcome back to my YouTube channel. And guess what, you guys? We are starting the reading of Peerless Volume 4! Woo! By Meng Xi Shi. It's also known as Wu Shuang. And I'm so happy we have this volume. Because after the way the third volume ended, I was like, I need answers. Anyway, speaking of Volume 3, I actually listened to my videos so that I could get familiar with the voices and everything again. Maybe that's why I'm laughing, because I just finished the last bit earlier today. Who knows? Or maybe it's just excitement. Are you guys ready to get answers and to laugh your hearts out? Because I feel like we're going to. If you are, then dive in with me and enjoy. Chapter 117. The wintry winds howled, and the chill pierced him to the bone. Tsway Boo-qoo wore only a flimsy inner robe as he stood on the edge of the cliff, his back to the chasm below. The jade of Heaven Lake was in his hands, and it needed neither moon nor stars to glow. It glimmered with flashes of dark blues and pale greens, like a rippling spring. He was baffled. Why had the jade of Heaven Lake appeared here? He was holding the stone, but he felt neither the expected warmth nor the weight of it in his hand. Was this a dream? His thoughts were as chaotic as knotted thread swollen tight with seawater. Impossible to untangle, they sank only deeper with the beating of the waves. He knew he was dreaming, but he couldn't wake himself. In the depths of his confusion, he felt there was something important he still had to do. Someone was walking toward him, their silhouette growing clearer as they drew near. Feng Xiaolian. He'd held a long sword in one hand, cloaked in an aura of bloodlust. Tsway Boo-qoo saw that he was soaked red from head to toe, as if coming fresh from a battlefield on which he'd beheaded countless enemies. The blood on his sword was still wet. It trickled down the blade, painting a crimson trail in his wake. He stopped in front of Tsway Boo-qoo. "Give me the jade." "So you really were pretending to join them?" asked Tsway Boo-qoo. Feng Xiao nodded. "How else could we infiltrate the enemy's lair and capture everyone in one fell swoop?" "The pavilion leader of the 13 floors. What is their real identity?" "I haven't managed to learn that yet," said Feng Xiao. "But I killed Fah You-in and the others. The mastermind won't stand for it. Sooner or later, he'll reveal himself to me." Feng Xiao's face was spattered with blood, his hair wild. A few strands tugged themselves loose and fell scattered over his temples, but he paid them no heed. His gaze was as keen as a knife, the slant of his mouth cold. The usual relaxed and carefree air he wore when chatting and laughing was nowhere to be seen. "Give me the jade," he said again, holding out his hand. "You stabbed me and left me for dead," said Tsway Boo-qoo coldly. "I need the jade to heal myself. Why should I give it to you?" Even in the dream, the two rivals pulled no punches. Neither was willing to concede an inch to the other. Tsway Boo-qoo had no friends. He didn't need any. There would always be more cases for the Tsway Bureau to solve, enough to consume any spare moment he might have. Yet somehow, in recent days, Feng Xiao had become inextricable from these cases, to the point that he was present more frequently than Xiaoxian and Zhang Sun. On the surface, the two continued to match wits, never overlooking an opportunity to set one another up for a fall. But in reality... He recalled how, in boiling commandery, Yuan Sansi had approached him as his mother Lady Yu's Shixiong. Step by step, he lured Tsway Boo-qoo into his trap. It wasn't that Tsway Boo-qoo hadn't had moments of suspicion, but due to the pressing nature of their circumstances, his judgment had dulled. Feng Xiao had eavesdropped on Tsway Boo-qoo's conversation with Yuan Sansa from a tree, and had afterward proudly suggested splitting the credit for finding Emperor Xiao of Wei's lost treasure. Tsway Boo-qoo had taken this as confirmation that everything Yuan Sansa had said was true. In hindsight, now that Tsway Boo-qoo considered it, his thought process had thus been, if even Feng Xiao believes Yuan Sansa, his claims must have some merit. Was this not a sign that Tsway Boo-qoo implicitly trusted Feng Xiao? Only at that moment, inside the dream, did Tsway Boo-qoo come to realize it. Ridiculous. To think Tsway Boo-qoo, one of the world's wisest men, could make such a blunder. The freezing winds buffeted his face, as piercingly cold as he remembered. Yet still he couldn't feel the jade stone in his hands. It was as insubstantial as a drifting cloud. He knew this was a dream, yet no matter how he struggled, he was unable to free himself from it. He remained immersed at the edge of an abyss that seemed both real yet false. The dream Feng Xiao smiled. You want the jade, but are you strong enough to hold on to it? He thrust his sword at Tsway Boo-qoo, lightning quick. Before Tsway Boo-qoo could blink, the blade had pierced his chest. Agony engulfed him. He looked down to see fresh blood dyeing his clothes red. It was déjà vu. The same vivid pain rolled over him a second time. He doubled over, curling his body around the wound. The blood-stained jade was snatched from his fingers. With a mocking smile, Feng Xiao thrust out a hand and shoved him off the cliff. The fall was endless. The abyss stretched open its bloody maw to swallow him as the figure staring down at him from the cliff's edge grew smaller and smaller. The pain sharpened until the sensation consumed him. Tsway Boo-qoo opened his mouth to scream, but all he managed was a low moan. Suddenly, there was a bed, cold and hard, beneath him. He gasped for breath, a film of cold sweat on his forehead. He cracked open his eyes, then closed them again. Even the hazy light of the night pearls embedded in the walls was blinding to someone who'd just woken up. Yet blinding as it was, it also felt real. Tsway Boo-qoo didn't raise a hand to block it out. It was at this point that he realized someone was sitting beside his bed. It's me. Feng Xiao's voice was very low, as if he was wary of being heard. But in this tiny room, it was loud enough to reach Tsway Boo-qoo's ears. Was this another dream? Tsway Boo-qoo's lips parted in a soft sigh. He'd no idea how long he'd slept. Countless images overlapped, dreams within dreams weaving together to exhaust his energy and drain his mind and body of strength. Your heart and lungs are undamaged. I avoided all your vital organs. Though you lost a lot of blood, Fah You-in intervened in time. Once the wounds heal, you'll be as good as new. Feng Xiao helped him up and held a bowl for him to drink some water. But Deputy Chief Feng rarely, or perhaps never, waited on others. He tipped the bowl a little too quickly. The remainder splashed all over Tsway Boo-qoo's face. Tsway Boo-qoo didn't react. He suspected he was still dreaming, though this dream seemed more absurd and ridiculous than the rest. Ah, my mistake. Feng Xiao laughed and raised his sleeve to wipe at the water dripping down Tsway Boo-qoo's face. At the sight of Tsway Boo-qoo's stoic expression, he couldn't resist saying, "Don't you have anything to ask me?" How... Tsway Boo-qoo frowned at the pain in his throat, then said hoarsely, "You had only seconds to act, yet you still avoided my vitals. Did you not even damage my meridians?" "Take a guess." Feng Xiao watched him expectantly. Tsway Boo-qoo didn't have the strength to roll his eyes, so he simply shut them. "Fine, don't tell me." Who the hell was bored enough to play a game of riddles in a dream? When Feng Xiao stabbed him after this particular disagreement, he could fall into the next one. But this time, he felt none of the expected pain between his ribs. "Hey, don't fall asleep." Feng Xiao reached out and pried Tsway Boo-qoo's eyelids open. Tsway Boo-qoo was forced to watch as a face thrust itself into his field of vision. What, is your heart acting up again? Didn't I just give you medicine? Just stab me again already, said Tsway Boo-qoo weakly. Make it quick. This dream was beyond irritating. Fine, I'll tell you, Feng Xiao huffed. You've finally woken up, so why are you playing dead? In Liugong City, you had a high fever and your life was hanging by a thread. That fellow Pei Jingzhe was scared out of his wits. He wanted to find you a doctor, but I stopped him. A doctor? What an astonishing waste of money. My venerable self is a practiced martial artist. I know enough medicine to get by. Back then, I took your pulse myself. Tsway Boo-qoo watched him in silence. Feng Xiao leaned forward and laid his hand over Tsway Boo-qoo's wounded chest. His touch so light, Tsway Boo-qoo almost didn't feel it. That's when I found your meridians were disordered and your life force was weak. The position of your heart is off by ½ an inch. That's why my strike not only avoided all your vital organs, but merely grazed your heart. Yes, your meridians are undamaged. If I hadn't moved against you at that moment, or if my actions hadn't been drastic enough, Yushu would have been the one to attack. Then you'd be dead for certain. His lips brushed Tsway Boo-qoo's ear as he spoke. He felt the slight warmth of Feng Xiao's breath, lending another touch of reality to the dream. He had just drawn in a breath to admit he owed Feng Xiao a favor when Feng Xiao came to a different conclusion entirely. So, you see, my attempt to save money on a doctor ended up preserving your life. Suddenly, Tsway Boo-qoo didn't want to say anything at all. Feng Xiao took Tsway Boo-qoo's wrist and channeled a thread of internal energy. Tsway Boo-qoo's cold limbs gradually warmed as a blazing flame kindled to life within his chest. Even the pain retreated to the edges of his awareness. This was feeling less and less like a dream. In the dim light, Feng Xiao watched Tsway Boo-qoo's eyes flicker, weak and wavering, like two lanterns drifting upon a river, seemingly closed, yet far out of reach. After coming to rest on him briefly, they wandered away again. Feng Xiao stretched out a hand and covered his eyes, cupping those lanterns within his palm. Immediately, Tsway Boo-qoo seemed to steady himself. His eyelids trembled slightly, and his lashes brushed Feng Xiao's palm, tickling him. Just relax, Feng Xiao sighed. This man was nothing special to look at. At most, his eyes and mouth could be considered decently attractive. The wound had aggravated his perpetual look of ill health like piling snow upon frost. His face radiated sickliness. Even his lips were dry and cracked, so pale as to be bloodless. As Feng Xiao watched him, his original desire to fetch more water somehow flew out the window as another urge seized him. He slowly leaned forward until his lips brushed warmth. Only at this touch did Feng Xiao regain his senses and jerk back. This kiss was different from his previous heartless teasing, which he'd done merely to draw a reaction from Tsway Boo-qoo. Feng Xiao realized with a start that he hadn't been thinking at all. Terrifyingly, he'd done it on pure instinct. Feng Xiao was a rare man who considered even the famous beauty Feng Xiaolian no more enticing than a dry old bone. How could he have fallen for an invalid? Tsway Boo-qoo's eyes were covered. He had no idea what had just happened. When the hand blocking them moved away, Feng Xiao was sitting motionless beside the bed, so rigid he seemed to have been struck by a body-freezing spell. After a moment of bafflement, Tsway Boo-qoo dismissed Feng Xiao's odd behavior. It wasn't worth his energy. Instead, he asked, "How did you come to be in contact with Fan Yuan?" After a moment of silence, Tsway Boo-qoo tried again. "Your hair is a mess." "Ah?" Feng Xiao shook off his distraction and produced a palm-sized bronze mirror from his sleeve. He turned his face to the night pearls and examined himself with the keen gaze of an martial expert as he adjusted his hair. After a moment, he breathed a sigh of relief. "It's not that bad. How was it messy?" Tsway Boo-qoo had had enough. Here they were, on the knife's edge between life and death, and Feng Xiao was still fussing over his hair. Of course, this was his true nature. At least, he thought, he could now be certain that this wasn't a dream of his. "If you can't stay long, Hurry up and explain, so I can at least prepare myself. Tsway Boo-qoo was so feeble his words tumbled out, scattered and uneven. There was nothing to be gained from keeping secrets at this point. Feng Xiao coughed lightly. I wasn't in contact with Fah You-in. The one who approached me was Lin Yong. When we were heading back to the capital from Tiamoa, he came to me with a small gift. He told me then that Ishbara Kagan has planted several spies in the capital. Tsway Boo-qoo nodded. I remember he carries a torch for you. The corner of Feng Xiao's mouth twitched, but he didn't respond to this remark. We probed each other for information. I let slip that I had recently reached a plateau in my martial arts. After a few cups of wine, I confessed that the emperor didn't trust the Zhejiang Bureau, and that's why he'd established the Zuoye Bureau. So we'd keep each other in check. Lin Yong saw his chance and revealed his identity to me. He doesn't hold a high rank in the 13 floors, only 7th, and that's only because the pavilion leader thought his familiarity with the north would be useful. Otherwise, he wouldn't rank above Ning Shi. Has he met the pavilion leader? No. It was Yushu who introduced him into the 13 floors. Previously, the pavilion leader's envoy were the ones to pass along his orders, but Lin Yong said he'd met Ning Shi. Injury hadn't dulled Tsway Boo-qoo's wits. So the pavilion leader resides in the south. That's my belief as well, said Feng Xiao. Lin Yong offered me 3 incentives for joining them. 1, I would receive a noble title from the future emperor for services rendered to the throne. 2, the pavilion leader would share the refining jade technique. 3, I could leverage the strength of the new royal court to unify the demonic sects. He even gave me a valuable goodwill gift by order of the pavilion leader, the Sarira of Tsway Boo-qoo, the former leader of the unified demonic sect. Now even Tsway Boo-qoo was surprised. A valuable gift indeed. Sarira were pearl-like relics, objects sometimes found in the ashes of enlightened monks who passed away in meditation. They embodied the great wisdom of the Buddhist master. Martial arts grandmasters of a certain level might also leave behind sarira when they were cremated. In these cases, the sarira contained all the power the grandmaster had possessed in life. Should any Jianghu practitioner get their hands on one, it would have a miraculous effect on their martial arts. But the sarira of a grandmaster was almost impossible to find. Never mind the sarira of the great Tsway Boo-qoo. Naturally, it would be a strong temptation for Feng Xiao, himself a demonic practitioner. But I don't understand, said Tsway Boo-qoo. Tsway Boo-qoo's sarira is far more valuable than the refining jade technique. Why didn't the pavilion leader make it one of the incentives? Wouldn't that be far more tempting? Speaking so many words in a row left him short of breath. He coughed, aggravating his blood and qi. His wound ached. Feng Xiao wrapped his fingers around Tsway Boo-qoo's wrist and continued channeling internal energy into him. Despite the imperious style of his martial arts, his internal energy was gentle, moderated to a perfect flow. Tsway Boo-qoo felt not the slightest twinge of discomfort. Because he isn't a demonic practitioner, Feng Xiao said. He couldn't verify whether the sarira was genuine. Thus, he chose to offer it to me as a favor, hoping to cultivate a reputation as a man who's generous and worth following. It appears the sarira is genuine. It is, said Feng Xiao with a smile. Though there's only one, it will be a great boon to my internal cultivation. When the pavilion leader realizes he gave it to me for nothing, his heart is sure to ache in regret. For now, he sent a message through Lin Yong that he has 2 more sarira. If I commit to joining the 13 floors, he'll give both to me once they achieve their goal. Tsway Boo-qoo gave a mocking laugh. Their goal is usurping the throne. So the refining jade technique was enticement enough for you to set me up. There's a reason I didn't tell you in advance. The few words Lin Yong passed on made it clear there was someone in the 13 floors who knew you very well. Someone who was even familiar with your past. I suspected Xiao Xian or Zhang Sun. Tsway Boo-qoo frowned. You said nothing to me when I sent Jiang Suan to Donghai Commandery. Precisely. I didn't know who the spy was, what poison they held, or how much they knew. Of course, I thought it best to say nothing. I was certain they'd try to recruit you, but I didn't expect you to be so steadfast and unyielding in your refusal. What happened to all that cunning? Did you truly plan on letting Yushu torture you to death if I sat back and did nothing? Cocking his head, Tsway Boo-qoo asked, When you looked at me, weren't you hinting that I shouldn't accept? I was telling you to play along. Feng Xiao saw what Tsway Boo-qoo was about. Don't try to push the blame onto me or extract compensation. I'm telling you, this time, you brought this on yourself. These are your just desserts. Tsway Boo-qoo blinked twice, slowly, then said with great difficulty, You'd already joined them. If you were really a member of the 13 floors and saw me cooperate so readily, wouldn't you presume something was afoot? Fan Yuan definitely would, and if you remained silent, he'd have suspected you too. So you see, my sacrifice was all to protect you. Feng Xiao clapped his hand over Tsway Boo-qoo's mouth, rendering him unable to utter another word. Shut up. The next time I stab you, your lordship, I won't miss. Feng Xiao's voice was low as he hissed. I promise I'll kill you with a single thrust. Tsway Boo-qoo neither resisted nor struggled, nor made a sound. He simply looked up at him quietly. When he was peaceful like this, he appeared especially docile and meek, a sight all the more precious for its rarity. Satisfied, Feng Xiao was about to speak a few more acerbic words when they both heard a noise from outside. Feng Xiao's head snapped around toward the door. Chapter 118. The stone door slid slowly open. Fan Yuan stepped in. Tsway Boo-qoo was lying on the bed, his breathing even. He appeared sound asleep, but Fan Yuan asked him without preamble, Feeling better? Clearly he knew Tsway Boo-qoo was awake. No matter how well someone feigned sleep, their breathing would give them away. No martial expert would be fooled. Fan Yuan ignored the "Please leave" written all over Tsway Boo-qoo's face and sat down by the bed. I know you're upset with me. Your teacher indeed owes you. But to achieve my goal, I won't hesitate, even if it means sacrificing lives. You and I each serve our own masters. Since you refused to join us willingly, how else was I to draw you here? After shooting him a cold look, Tsway Boo-qoo closed his eyes again. Since the 2 Jin dynasties, countless visionaries have thrown their weight into moving the world. All of them met tragic ends. They had armies and weapons. Everything was in their favor. Time, place, people. They were in a far better position to succeed than this pavilion leader of yours. Xianxiang, with all your wisdom, do you really believe he can achieve what he claims? Fan Yuan appeared unconcerned. There are many things people attempt despite knowing they are impossible. Man proposes and heaven disposes. Boo-qoo, you say time and place were in their favor. Then you should know that, just as some visionaries succeeded due to fortunate timing, others failed precisely despite their favorable placement. Take Yang Jian, for instance, who usurped the throne through his daughter's connection to the emperor. Bluntly, he rose to power because of a woman. Though history will remember his name, the stigma can never be erased. You shouldn't underestimate the pavilion leader. He's more capable than you can imagine. Tsway Boo-qoo sneered. He's gathered so many martial arts masters and has pawns like Feng Xiao and Yuan Sansi planted within the imperial court. Not to mention a strategist like you, Fan Xianqiang. He is indeed quite capable. Is that all you think he has? Asked Fan Yuan meaningfully. At that, Tsway Boo-qoo narrowed his eyes, but Fan Yuan didn't continue. Instead, he took a porcelain bottle from his lapels. This is a medicine that nourishes blood and qi. It's no poison. It'll do you good. Whether you take it or not is up to you. Rest well. He patted Tsway Boo-qoo's shoulder, then rose to leave. The stone door rumbled shut behind him. Feng Xiao leapt down from a shadowed corner of the stone chamber ceiling and set about brushing the dust of cobwebs from his clothes. He sensed me. The interaction of qi between martial experts was subtle. Feng Xiao had concealed himself flawlessly the entire time, and Fan Yuan had never once glanced toward his hiding spot. Yet he was certain Fan Yuan had discovered him. This was no surprise. Hiding in such a small room was a difficult task in the first place. Feng Xiao had been fully prepared to fight Fan Yuan, but though Fan Yuan had discovered him, he hadn't exposed him. Feng Xiao couldn't fathom why. He picked up the bottle of medicine Fan Yuan had left behind. Pulling out the stopper, he gave it a sniff, then replaced it and tucked the bottle into his lapels. No matter what the old man has in mind, you'd best not touch it. Tsway Boo-qoo watched him take the bottle without comment. He said just now that many attempt great things despite knowing they're impossible. That was a passers-by's evaluation of Confucius, praising him as a man of great wisdom and courage, someone who pursued his ideals in the face of insurmountable obstacles. Really quickly, the footnote for evaluation of Confucius, it is a parable from Book 14 of the Analects, a foundational Confucian text. Returning to the reading. By applying it to himself, Fan Yuan is saying he has his own troubles. He seemed to hint that the pavilion leader's subordinates aren't limited to the people we're aware of, that he's holding a trump card we have yet to discover. Are you saying Fan Yuan's a double agent, toiling away patiently in enemy territory? Feng Xiao scoffed. He stood back and watched as I stabbed you in the heart. What an exemplary double agent. He certainly gives the role his all. Tsway Boo-qoo sighed. There's another possibility. Feng Xiao frowned. He's not with the 13 floors, but he's not on our side either. Yes. He and I have known each other for many years. He knows what kind of person I am, Tsway Boo-qoo said gravely. He's wise enough to guess that even if I submit, I would always chafe at being manipulated, and am almost certain to stir up trouble. Feng Xiao found this observation deeply amusing. This is the first time I've seen someone so happy to call themselves a troublemaker. Tsway Boo-qoo regarded him expressionlessly, and Feng Xiao reached out and flicked his forehead. If your body and mind are at ease, your ailments will heal themselves. I'm just hoping you recover faster. You should thank me. A moment of tolerance would bring lasting peace. Tsway Boo-qoo closed his eyes and continued. Since Fan Yuan didn't strike at you, we can assume he won't expose you to Yushu and the others for now. You came to infiltrate the enemy's lair. What preparations have you made? This baffled Feng Xiao. What do you mean, preparations? Surely you weren't simply planning on fighting your way out alone. Tsway Boo-qoo's voice rose slightly in exasperation, but he started coughing before he could say more. Yours truly is a man of peerless wisdom and courage who can take down 100 men single-handed. Why would I need anyone's help? Feng Xiao asked in surprise. A moment of tolerance would bring lasting peace. To hell with fucking peace! Tsway Boo-qoo heaved himself up to grab the empty water bowl and flung it at Feng Xiao. Feng Xiao caught it easily and set it on the table. He smiled and said in a soothing tone, Look at you, so irritable even when you're injured. Don't you want to get better? I've had a card up my sleeve since leaving the capital. I ordered Lao Sahn to bring some men and tell us. He's waiting at Raoyang, which borders on Ping. Now that he was talking sense, Tsway Boo-qoo calmed down. Even so, his outburst had induced another coughing fit. Feng Xiao secretly found his flustered reaction hilarious. He poured another half a bowl of warm water and offered it to Tsway Boo-qoo. I didn't know anything about Mount Tiannan either. I only sent word to Lao Sun after Yuan Sansa told us about it. They should have been en route when we set off, but without anyone to guide them, so it'll take them some time to find this place. Not to mention, there's the Ursa Major Twin Jade Array, which will slow them considerably. I don't imagine there's anyone other than you and Fan Yuan who can break it. Correct, said Tsway Boo-qoo. They may not find us unless we create some kind of disturbance to draw them here. I'll think of something, said Feng Xiao. You should get some rest, Taoist Master Tsway. Who knows how long you can soldier on with that broken-down body of yours? You should moderate your temper, lest you find yourself in the underworld before you've had a chance to defeat the 13 floors of Yuan. As long as you don't anger me, I'll be fine, said Tsway Boo-qoo coldly. Feng Xiao blinked, then struck out with lightning speed and tapped Tsway Boo-qoo's sleep acupoint. As Tsway Boo-qoo slumped, Feng Xiao caught him and laid him down on the bed. Forced into sleep, the crease between Tsway Boo-qoo's brows remained, as if his still spiraling thoughts rendered him unable to slumber in peace. Feng Xiao spent a minute rubbing the crease to smooth it out. It was only in moments like this that Tsway Boo-qoo looked so harmless and fragile. But he only looked it. Not only was he possessed of a venomous tongue, the man carried in his chest a heart of stone. There was nothing he wouldn't do to achieve his goals. He had an ungovernable temper and was impossible to placate, though his ailing body was like a candle flame guttering in the wind on the verge of going out. Even his name, Tsway Boo-qoo, had a cold and alienating air, like a mountain boulder that had weathered winds and rain, frost and snow. It did not require the understanding of strangers, nor the intimacy of potential friends. To be cursed with the misfortune of falling in love with a man like this, the crimes of one's past life must have been unforgivable. Yet here was Feng Xiao, handsome and dashing, a man of unparalleled elegance. The instant he opened his mouth, beauties lined up at his door. Even Feng Xiaolian, a woman captivating enough to topple nations, had desired a night with him, to say nothing of the countless other men and women who'd vied for his favor. His admirers were everywhere. The heavens hadn't only bestowed him with uncommon beauty, they'd also gifted him with extraordinary intelligence. Growing up, whatever he wished to learn, whatever he wished to obtain, he did so while barely lifting a finger. Even the position of Fajing's sect leader, one countless demonic practitioners coveted and bled for, had been tossed to him like a hot potato simply because the previous leader desired him as a successor. Feng Xiao wasn't one of those hypocrites who remained outwardly reserved despite inward arrogance. He really did feel that in all the world's vastness, few could keep pace with him. Cui Buqu, Yan Wushi, and he... Sorry. Now I just got hyped from reading his name. That's so funny. Okay, I was wondering if his name would be mentioned at least once. Okay, I'm gonna read that again. He really did feel that in all the world's vastness, few could keep pace with him. Cui Buqu, Yan Wushi, and other leaders of the demonic sects might be his match in martial arts. But Feng Xiao was certain that when it came to beauty and brains, he was their superior by a wide margin. How could a man as perfect and peerless as himself fall in love with an invalid who was practically on death's doorstep? Not only did Feng Xiao refuse to believe it, if he told anyone else, he suspected they wouldn't believe it either. Feng Xiao glanced left and right, then plucked a night pearl from the stone wall. He shone the light over Tsway Boo-qoo's face, but still couldn't see anything special about it. An average nose, an average brow. The eyes and mouth were somewhat better, but only somewhat. They couldn't match even 1/10 of his splendor. He suddenly recalled that wretched situation they'd found themselves in together outside Liugong City. Like two mountain tigers trapped on the plains, they'd fled for their lives on the border of the Gobi. At the time, they'd each had their own agendas, yet they'd put aside their differences to cooperate temporarily, huddling in that cave beneath the cliff as they waited out the blizzard and the night. Tsway Boo-qoo had even forced Feng Xiao to call him Daddy 3 times. Back then, Feng Xiao had silently sworn that the moment he extricated himself, he'd make this sickly man kneel on the ground and cling to his legs while calling him Daddy in return. And what had been the result? Instead of looking down upon him in disdain, that sickly man's face, when he looked upon it, now gave him a burst of spontaneous joy. This simply wouldn't do. His thoughts raced. He reached out and placed his hand on the nape of Tsway Boo-qoo's neck, his palm flush against Tsway Boo-qoo's skin. Feng Xiao could feel, beneath his warmth, the feeble pulse of his life. He slowly tightened his grip. There was no evidence of pain in Tsway Boo-qoo's expression. He was exhausted from injury, his acupoints sealed. He'd already sunk into a deep slumber, his face now smooth and tranquil. He'd struggled over half his life, experienced what it was to wander destitute from place to place, and all there was of the kindness and callousness within people's hearts. For him, dying like this, in peace, would be a kind of relief. This cave thronged with masters like trees in a forest. Traps lay around every corner, and danger stalked them with every step. Fan Yuan, Yushu, and Yuan Sansa were challenge enough, to say nothing of the pavilion leader who'd yet to reveal himself. If Feng Xiao hoped to escape unscathed, he'd need to pick his opportunities carefully. And now he also had Tsway Boo-qoo to worry about. Even if this man had hundreds of tricks up his sleeve, no amount of ideas could prevent him from being a burden in this situation. Tsway Boo-qoo was unhealthily thin. His neck was long and slender. The slightest pressure would be sufficient to snap it. Then Feng Xiao would no longer breathe, much less sneer at Feng Xiao, spit his cutting words, or seethe with nefarious thoughts as he sought every possible chance to screw over the Zhejiang Bureau. And Feng Xiao would be as free as a bird soaring over the mountains and rivers. No longer would he have any weaknesses. There were countless benefits to be had and no disadvantages to speak of. And yet, he couldn't do it. The reason for this could be summed up in 6 words. He couldn't bear to lose this. He couldn't bear to lose the acid words that pelted him like a corrosive rain. He couldn't bear to lose the arched brow that accompanied the sneering curl of that lip. He couldn't even bear to lose the way this man said Deputy Chief Feng in a tone that was 7 parts ridicule and 3 parts scheming. What on earth was so great about this invalid? Feng Xiao withdrew his hand from Tsway Boo-qoo's neck and sighed. He lowered his head and pressed his lips to the supple warmth of Tsway Boo-qoo's own, slowly exploring the contours of his mouth. Then he bit down viciously. Oh my God. Had he known this would happen, he would have stabbed this man to death in the Gobi. Why else would he make such trouble for himself? Chapter 119. Upon leaving the stone chamber, Feng Xiao followed Fan Yuan's instructions and proceeded to the main hall at the center of the cave complex. These walls were full of twists and turns, with many intersecting paths and secret passages. He had yet to learn them all, and in any case, he had only joined the 13 floors recently. Fan Yuan and the others were still wary of him. They wouldn't tell him everything yet. He met the occasional maid or guard along the way. Those who recognized him stopped and bowed in greeting, but were otherwise reticent. If he waylaid them to ask who they were or where they came from, they dared not answer fully. Their accents were mixed, some from the north and some from the south, but it was clear they'd been trained on their duties here. From their ashen complexions, he guessed they hadn't seen the sun for a long time. They'd likely been taken on when this cavern had first been turned into the 13 floors base. Feng Xiao thought they resembled shambling corpses who'd been roaming their tombs for years on end. A chilly gloom hung around them, and they didn't look amenable to bribes. He observed them for a while, but couldn't spot any weaknesses. He'd have to set his sights elsewhere. Based on his own observations and his discussion with Tsway Boo-qoo, he'd guessed that this natural cave was circular. Tunnels had been dug leading from the various winding passages to the main hall in the center, and if anyone wished to leave, they'd have to pass through the Ursa Major Twin Jade Array. Tsway Boo-qoo had explained roughly how to pass through the array, but he had cautioned that while that array took Ursa Major as its focal point, it possessed a kaleidoscope of possible changes based on the 28 constellations of traditional astrology. Any slight adjustment made by the creator could set one's head spinning, and anyone attempting to traverse it would be trapped with no hope of reorienting themselves. Now that Feng Xiao considered it, Fan Yuan's suggestion to lure Tsway Boo-qoo here was itself worthy of scrutiny. Fan Yuan had to know that, as his disciple, Tsway Boo-qoo had also mastered the Ursa Major twin jade array. Did he wish to pit Tsway Boo-qoo and Feng Xiao against the 13 floors of Yuan? If so, who was behind Fan Yuan? The Southern Dynasty? Goguryeo? Feng Xiao reordered his wandering thoughts and temporarily cast Fan Yuan from his mind. He couldn't see the rising or setting of the sun and moon within the cave, and had no notion of whether it was night or day. Leaving the cave would be too much trouble, and though he had an hourglass in his chambers, he was too lazy to turn back for it. After a quick calculation, Feng Xiao guessed it was the morning of the 7th day of the 7th month, the day of the Qixi festival, on which the pavilion leader was due to arrive. Neither Feng Xiao nor Tsway Boo-qoo had ever met the leader of the 13 floors. Considering Yushu and Yuan Sansa's martial abilities and temperaments, Feng Xiao knew common interest wasn't enough to bring them together under an inferior master. The pavilion leader must, at the very least, be equally capable, a powerful martial arts practitioner. In his mind, Feng Xiao went down the list of martial experts he knew. The interests of most martial grandmasters lay beyond the pursuit of political power. They instead yearned to explore the upper reaches of the mountain known as martial arts. Cui Buqu had been one such example. If he hadn't continued pushing to increase his martial prowess and triggered a chi deviation, the demonic grandmaster would likely still be among the living. After discarding those with no interest in political affairs, only a few candidates remained. Feng Xiao even briefly considered whether the Emperor of Southern Chun was the elusive master himself, but the current Emperor of Chun was extravagantly wasteful and cared only for singing and dancing. He simply wasn't capable of orchestrating a plot on this scale. Feng Xiao's thoughts quickened with his pace. Before he knew it, light was shining before him. He'd reached the guest hall. Several people who'd been conversing among themselves turned around. One hurried over, his face animated with surprise and joy. "Yuan, I missed you dearly the entire way here." Feng Xiao's lips twitched slightly. He smiled. "It's been a while, young estate master Lin." If only Tsway Boo-qoo were capable of words like, "I missed you dearly." He imagined Tsway Boo-qoo's pale face flushing crimson as he was forced to stammer those words. He didn't break out in gooseflesh at the thought. Instead, his lips curved in secret anticipation. What an awful pity that Taoist Master Tsway would never say such a thing. The man who'd hurried over was, of course, none other than Lin Yong, the young master of Yendang Mountain Estate, ranked 7th among the directors of the 13 floors of Yuan. Feng Xiao had become acquainted with Lin Yong by chance years ago, but he'd quickly sensed something darker lurking beneath the man's frivolous demeanor and had sent someone to investigate. Sure enough, the true Lin Yong was nothing like the carefree and spirited image he presented. He tortured his servants, whipping them with steel cords for the slightest infraction. More than a few corpses were transported out of his estate every month. The Lin family had made their fortune traveling between the Central Plains and the western regions to trade silk and porcelain, but after Lin Yong took over, Yendang Mountain Estate had pivoted to providing escort services and weaponsmithing instead. This young man was far from the simple fool he appeared to be. During their recent meeting in the capital, Lin Yong had noticed Feng Xiao's apparent frustration with the emperor and, after probing him, had taken the chance to reveal his identity and invited him into the 13 floors. Feng Xiao had made a show of reluctance, outplaying Lin Yong at his own game. Lin Yong had been interested in Feng Xiao and thought the two of them were quite close. He thus greeted him warmly. "It's been many days since we met, but Yuan is as charming as ever," he said, smiling as he spoke. But a hint of resentment colored his words as he continued. "You're one of us now. Why are you still saying young estate master this and young estate master that? Please, call me by my courtesy name, Huaya." "I'm too used to it. You'll have to be patient with me." Feng Xiao laughed and turned his gaze to the man behind Lin Yong. And this must be Guild Leader Ning. Ning Shi stepped forward and cupped his hands in greeting. Feng Gongzi lives up to his reputation, as radiant as jade. Although Ning Shi was over 50 and had grown stout in his old age, his palms were noticeably darker than the rest of him. It was obvious at a glance that he trained in some kind of palm technique and shouldn't be underestimated. Lin Yong couldn't hide his displeasure as Feng Xiao ignored him to greet Ning Shi instead. "He has no interest in you," said a voice in his ear. "Why delude yourself?" Lin Yong's face grew stormy as he turned to Yu Xiu. Then he smiled. "If you hadn't lost that eye, I'd speak pleasantly to you too. It's a pity your looks are no longer worthy of your reputation. Perhaps His Highness the Prince of Jin felt the same way. Is that why he discarded you, his loyal pawn?" Yu Xiu sneered. "Just because you're a cut sleeve, you think everyone is. If not for my respect for the pavilion leader, I'd have killed you long ago." Some of those present were in charge of canal transport in the south, while others amassed riches within the northern dynasty. Fah You-in was a walking treasury of knowledge, and Yu Xiu was a man daring enough to masquerade as a Gukter Kagan who'd stirred up a tempest with a flip of his hand. True, Tsway Boo-qoo had dashed his plans and rendered him a fugitive, but he'd still been the counselor of the Prince of Jin. He'd been privy to many of the prince's secrets and knew a great deal about what went on behind the scenes at the imperial court. Their current company alone was capable of whipping up towering waves. Even without the aid of Feng Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo, overthrowing a dynasty might not be an impossible dream with sufficient preparation. However, these were all great men from across the land. Though the same goal might bring them together for now, none were willing to submit to any of the others. When Yu Xiu had been counselor to the Prince of Jin, he'd presented himself as cultured and refined, with an elegant, serene bearing. Now, after his drastic change in circumstances, he no longer held back his temper. Not only did he openly show his distaste for Lin Yong, Feng Xiao had noted the unconcealed bloodlust in his gaze the few times their eyes met. Yu Xiu had never forgotten for a moment his hatred of Feng Xiao for the loss of his eye, but Feng Xiao was no pushover himself. Now that he was also a member of the 13 floors of Yunhai, Yu Xiu couldn't kill him. All he could do was vent his anger on Tsway Boo-qoo in his place. "Enough," said Fah You-in, intervening before Lin Yong could retort. "Both of you are directors of the 13 floors. You must set your disagreements aside and focus on the larger picture. The pavilion leader has called us here today because he is making preparations." This got everyone's attention. Yet just as Fah You-in was about to say more, he looked around and asked, "Where is our 4th director, Su Xiansheng?" He was talking about Yuan Sansa. "I haven't seen him since last night," said Yu Xiu. Feng Xiao smiled. "I have." As the assembly turned to him, he finished, "At Feng Xiaolian's door." Understanding dawned on everyone's faces. Only Fah You-in leveled him with that same meaningful gaze. As if on cue, a voice rang out from the entrance. "Feng Xiao, you low-life cur!" Yuan Sansa had appeared in the guest hall just in time to hear Feng Xiao's words. He immediately struck out with a fist. Unruffled, Feng Xiao parried with his fan. Yuan Sansa's every move was ruthless and left no room to breathe. Though a fight had erupted in the guest hall, no one intervened. On the contrary, everyone stepped back to give them space, avidly watching the battle unfold. All of them wanted to know, who was stronger? Feng Xiao had no interest in an all-out battle with Yuan Sansa. He deliberately pulled the fighting toward Fah You-in and ducked behind him, using him as a shield. Fah You-in had no choice but to stop them. "Enough! Su Xiansheng, tell us what happened." "Feng Xiaolian is dead!" Yuan Sansa roared. Everyone was stunned. Such an incredible beauty. Dead? Even Lin Yong, who had little interest in women, thought it an upsetting waste. When? Though Feng Xiaolian ranked at the bottom of the 13 floors and was the weakest practitioner among them, she was by no means an easy target. Besides, who could bear to end the life of such a stunning beauty? Yuan Sansa fixed his gaze on Feng Xiao. Last night, I heard you and Feng Xiaolian speaking privately in your room. The next day, she's dead. How do you explain this? What is there to explain? Asked Feng Xiao innocently. If anything had happened between me and Feng Xiaolian, I'd still be out cold right now. How could I be standing before you, bouncing with energy? I have no grudge against her. But Yuan Xiong, your room isn't next to mine. How did you happen to overhear us? If you wish to frame someone, surely this isn't the way. He turned to Fan Yun. I'm the deputy pavilion leader. Yuan Sansa is Si Xianxiang. This is insubordination. What should be done? Yuan Sansa sneered. What deputy leader? The pavilion leader has yet to officially appoint you. Fan Xianxiang and I spent the whole night talking. I only just returned to my chambers, where I found Feng Xiaolian lying dead. The slash across her throat was the work of a zither string. Don't think I don't know. In boiling commandery, you received Yu-yin and removed its strings to use as a weapon. Who else could have done it, if not you? You were with Fan Xianxiang the entire night? Asked Feng Xiao in a mild tone of confusion. What did you have to discuss that lasted all night? Fan Xianxiang, is this true? Fan Yuan pondered before answering. Actually, we didn't talk the entire night. Yuan Xiong left some time after midnight. Yuan Sansa looked at him in shock. I didn't leave until near dawn. Fan Yuan, what did this bastard give you to turn on me? Fan Xiong, calm yourself, Fan Yuan said with a frown. Feng Xiaolian's death is indeed alarming, but we mustn't point fingers. We can wait for the pavilion leader's arrival before we draw any conclusions. Let's take a look at her first. No one raised any objections. With Fan Yuan standing between, Yuan Sansa was forced to give up. He glared once more at Feng Xiao and turned to leave. Yet he'd taken merely 2 steps when his expression changed, and he faltered. What's that smell? Fire! Cried Lin Yong in shock. Before anyone else could react, the pounding footsteps of the guards came from outside, voices raised to call for help with the flames. Feng Xiao's heart thumped as he recalled Cui Buqu, whose sleep acupoint he'd struck not long ago. Talk once we're outside, roared Fan Yun. The ground shook violently, and dust and loose rocks cascaded down from the ceiling. Everyone went pale. Feng Xiao no longer hesitated. He slipped to the front of the group and dashed out the door. Eyes glinting, Yu Xiu followed a step behind. Chapter 120. Most fires started small, but Fan Yuan and the others were in the center of the cave, far away from anywhere a fire might have started. If they could smell it from here, the flames had already spread. A low rumble sounded as the ceiling trembled. More stones came clattering down. Outside the cave, the promised storm had arrived. Wind and thunder raged, but there was no rain. Lightning struck the cliffs, shaking the mountainside. The cliff had several vents, too small for even a child to crawl through. Now, wind howled through these crevices and filled the inhabitants' hearts with unease. As cries of "Fire!" went through the taverns, a small uproar broke out. Fanned by the wind, the fire quickly spread. Even ants strove to preserve their own lives. No matter how numb their training had made them, the maids and guards were still human. This was a remote place, far from help, and getting in or out was nigh impossible. Unable to escape, they began to panic. The kitchen was the only place with firewood. As much of the cave was lit by night pearls, the fire could only have started there. Everyone crammed into the corridors. Some rushed to the kitchen to help douse the fire, while others fled to the entrance of the cave without looking back. Those who went to the kitchen soon found they were too late. Some villain had poured out a trail of lamp oil to feed the flames. There was no hope of getting the fire under control. In the midst of the chaos, Feng Xiao ran in a different direction entirely. He'd struck Tsway Boo-qoo's sleep acupoint, sending him into a deep slumber. If no one brought him out of it, Tsway Boo-qoo wouldn't wake in time to notice the fire. By the time it reached his door, there would be no escape. The mighty chief of the Zuoye Bureau would burn to death. Such a death was jarringly unsuited to his crafty, resourceful personality. Feng Xiao was afraid Tsway Boo-qoo would come back as a ghost and drag him to hell too. Someone had plucked the night pearls from the stone wall of the corridors. Without their light, the cave was dark, the air thick with sparks and smoke. Even Feng Xiao found it hard to breathe. After finally groping his way to Tsway Boo-qoo's chambers, he pushed open the door, only to be greeted with an empty bed. Feng Xiao's heart sank. Before he could turn, a mocking laugh came from behind him. So you really did fake joining us, but your collusion with him was real. A palm blast carrying the pungent smell of smoke accompanied his words, sweeping toward the gate of life, a fatal acupoint on Feng Xiao's lower back. Feng Xiao's reaction was instantaneous. The moment Yushu spoke, Feng Xiao was already drifting forward. Without looking back, he leapt into the air and pushed off the stone wall before him, reversing course to meet Yushu's palm with his own. There was a loud bang, and the tiny chamber quaked, unable to withstand the violent force of their true qi. Debris tumbled down, but the combatants were unscathed. They sprang apart so fast they appeared a little more than smudges of shadow. In the darkness, those shadows interwove. Only their opponent's breath gave a clue as to their next move. Each judgment was made in a split second. The combatants seemed to flicker between the land of the living and the realm of the dead. If not for Tsway Boo-qoo and Feng Xiao, Yushu would still have been beside the Prince of Jin as his confidant and counselor. The Prince of Jin was young and an admirer of all things beautiful. Though he hadn't laid a hand on Yushu, a subtle and inexpressible suggestiveness had colored their relationship as the two had grown closer. Yushu had been only too happy to use this intimacy to his advantage. The plans of the 13 floors of Yuan were vast and sprawling, their agents embedded both within the court and without. Yushu, confidant of the Prince of Jin, was one of them. He didn't mind serving the pavilion leader and helping him with his grand plans, but the only person he truly cared for was Princess Tianjin. If the pavilion leader succeeded, Princess Tianjin would gain her freedom, and she and Yushu could be together. After several years of scheming, everything had seemed to be falling into place. They had merely lacked a timely opportunity. Yet their perfect game of chess had been completely overturned by Tsway Boo-qoo and Feng Xiao. Originally, the Jiejian and Huaya bureaus were designed to keep each other in check, but at some unknown point, they'd begun working together instead. Tsway Boo-qoo was sly and cunning, while Feng Xiao was a powerful fighter. Alone, neither of them was much to fear, but together? Yushu had seen the results with his own eyes. Back in the Western Khaganate, he would have killed Tsway Boo-qoo easily had Feng Xiao not intervened and thrown all his plans into disarray. If Tsway Boo-qoo had died, the Huaya bureau would be a dragon without a head. And though Feng Xiao might be the strongest martial artist in the land, without Tsway Boo-qoo's crafty plots and astute observations, what could he achieve? Yushu hated these two for repeatedly foiling the 13 floors' plans, and he hated Feng Xiao even more for taking his eye. Now that he was certain Feng Xiao had feigned his loyalty and was here to make trouble, he showed no mercy. Every move was meant to kill. If he had his way, he would put Feng Xiao in his grave today. Feng Xiao was in no mood to entertain him. Tsway Boo-qoo couldn't have woken up on his own so quickly, yet he was missing. The only possibility was that someone had taken him, and wherever they were, no good fate awaited Tsway Boo-qoo. Yushu could sense Feng Xiao was anxious to extricate himself from the fight, but he didn't understand why. Everything he understood about their relationship was from a time before they'd left the capital. As far as he knew, the Jiejian and Huaya bureaus served their own interests and had their own plans. Any cooperation between them was a short-term affair. There were no deep ties there. Seeing Feng Xiao in a hurry to find Tsway Boo-qoo, Yushu could only surmise that Tsway Boo-qoo was in possession of something important. Once the thought sparked, it blazed through his mind, and he rushed off in pursuit of Feng Xiao. They flew through one secret passage after another. Every time Feng Xiao sped up in an attempt to throw Yushu off his trail, Yushu swiftly caught up. Evading him was impossible in such a narrow passage. Feng Xiao soon wearied of playing chase. He changed direction and raced toward the exit. By now, the cave was in chaos. Some desperately sought a way out, while others looked for a safe place to hide from the fire. No one paid Feng Xiao and the other directors any mind. Fah You-in and Yuan Sansa were nowhere to be found. Feng Xiao was beginning to have a sneaking suspicion that this chaos had something to do with the sickly Tsway Boo-qoo. I was just thinking the same thing. Oh gosh. But the man in question was gravely injured and could scarcely stand. How could he have the wherewithal to unleash such havoc on the enemy? After Yushu had fled from Feng Xiao in the Western Khaganate, he'd been personally treated by the leader of the 13 floors. The pavilion leader had even given Yushu a powerful and deadly hidden weapon, the needle Liao Yan Shui Po. It was colorless, nearly formless, and light as a feather. But when stimulated with internal energy, it could pierce an opponent's true qi and penetrate their acupoints. By melding into the enemy's body and disrupting their meridians, it would act as a poison, plunging them into terrible agony. Yushu had made several previous attacks with Liao Yan Shui Po, but Feng Xiao had slyly evaded them all, until now. Feng Xiao, mere inches ahead, slowed as rocks came tumbling down into his path. Yushu brought his saber up in a sharp slash. Though a flick of Feng Xiao's sleeve and a palm blast dispersed Yushu's saber tea, Yushu was undeterred. He snapped his fingers, and spears of wind pierced Feng Xiao's shoulder. Feng Xiao swayed in place as he realized something was wrong. But Yushu gave him no chance to breathe. He crooked his fingers, infusing them with spiritual energy as he lunged forward and clawed at Feng Xiao's head. Before his fingers pierced flesh, Feng Xiao vanished into thin air. Yushu had missed. It was surely some trick. Feng Xiao must have darted behind the boulder in front of him. Yushu rushed forward, but there was nothing there. Instead, he found himself surrounded by a thick mist. The light of a scant few night pearls seemed to hover in the distance, floating and warped. It was as if that one step had brought him into a different world entirely. Blast! Thought Yushu. He'd fallen into a trap. Feng Xiao had lured him into the Ursa Major Twin Jade Array. He'd listened as Fah You-in explained the workings of this array before, and under normal circumstances, he knew how to leave it. But now, many stones had shaken loose from the walls, and the crash of rolling waves filled his ears, as if rain were pouring down directly overhead. It felt nothing like the array he'd previously passed through. Gusts of chill air surged around him, slicing past his clothes like arrows of ice. He evaded them, narrowly avoiding being sliced to ribbons. Yushu advanced carefully, wary of the quicksand traps he knew lay ahead. A single misstep would see him captive within the sand, its demonic hands yearning to drag its victim into the abyss. Fah You-in had once said this array could mutate endlessly. Yushu had thought it an exaggeration at the time. Only now did he truly appreciate Fah You-in's abilities and why the pavilion leader valued him so highly. For a sufficiently skilled user of this array, trapping a martial expert or two was nothing. Even if hundreds of Imperial guards stormed in, this labyrinth would ensure they'd never see the light of day again. The metallic clash of swords rang in his ears. Yushu couldn't tell if they were sounds from a real battle or an illusion born of the array. He pressed his back to the stone wall and fell still, his handsome face darkening with anger. After a moment, his lips twisted in a sneer. Liao Yan Shui Po had found its target. Feng Xiao would feel its effects very soon. Yushu was sure to find him before he escaped the array. Their next encounter would spell the death of the chief of the Jiejian Bureau. When Tsway Boo-qoo awoke, he didn't know his sleep acupoint had been struck. nor that someone had come to unseal it. He groped around and found something beside his bed, a jar of lamp oil. It was a trifle that could turn small fires into raging infernos. He was certain it hadn't been in his room earlier. The 13 floors of Yuan were champing at the bit to torment him. Why would they give him lamp oil? If this unexpected gift wasn't from Feng Xiao, it had to be from Fan Yun. He'd parted ways with Fan Yun years ago. They had their own places to be, their own things to do. They'd never so much as exchanged a single letter. But his image of Fan Xianxiang was not as someone easily enticed to join a revolt. The 13 floors of Yuan might attract more volatile types like Yushu and Yuan Sansa, but that didn't mean they could impress Fan Yun. That Fan Yun himself had hinted so several times was as good as proof. Tsway Boo-qoo slowly sat up. After fumbling around for a while, he found several more items of interest. A dagger, the same one Feng Xiao had stabbed him with, as well as the fire starters Tsway Boo-qoo had been carrying, which hadn't been confiscated. A set of maid's clothing was folded beside them. Even if Feng Xiao had left them to Tsway Boo-qoo for his protection, Fan Yun was a careful man. He would have noticed. From all Tsway Boo-qoo's observations, the pavilion leader of the 13 floors of Yuan was no fool. Fan Yun must have taken great pains to join and done much to earn the pavilion leader's trust in order to become his advisor and gain control over the organization's grand designs. And yet, Fan Yun was assisting Tsway Boo-qoo in wreaking havoc. He'd even left him a jar of lamp oil, as if afraid Tsway Boo-qoo couldn't make enough trouble on his own. Regardless of where Fan Yun's true intentions lay, of course Tsway Boo-qoo would put it to good use. The night pearls served as the main source of light in the cave. There was only one place that used fire, and that was the kitchen. He saw at once what Fan Yun wished him to do. In this case, he didn't mind being used. Inciting chaos was just what Tsway Boo-qoo wanted. He'd lend Fan Yun a hand, despite the risk. There was no other chance of escape. Tsway Boo-qoo coughed, and the salty sweet tang of blood rose in his throat. His broken-down body was no good for these sorts of capers, but if he enjoyed keeping out of trouble, he wouldn't be Tsway Boo-qoo. He took the dagger and the lamp oil. His gaze landed on the set of maid's clothing, and his mouth twitched. Most of the guards carried sabers. He might have passed himself off as one on a normal day, but right now his feet were unsteady and his limbs weak. The maid disguise would indeed be more convincing. Chapter 121. Liang Feng was a member of the 13 floors of Yuan, a simple and ordinary guard. He'd been a disciple from a small sect in Liaoling until their leader was killed by Yuan Sansa. All his Shishong who'd fought had died as well, and Liang Feng and the other remaining disciples had surrendered to Yuan Sansa, joining the 13 floors as underlings. The 13 floors of Yuan were wealthy and treated them well enough. To prevent Liang Feng and his sex siblings from conspiring together, however, they had separated them. Liang Feng was placed in the 4th floor, under the command of Yuan Sansa. He had traveled from Liaoling to Mount Tianan and had been guarding this cave ever since. The guards here almost never left the caves and were permitted down the mountain with even less frequency. Though they were generously compensated with salary, food, and clothing, what use was money when one lived secluded on a mountain year-round with hardly a glimpse of the sun? What was more, the 13 floors had guaranteed their loyalty with poison. He and his fellow guards had all been dosed. Without the antidote, which they received once a month, they couldn't run far. Even if they escaped, the most they could do was delay the effects of the poison. On one occasion, 2 discontented guards had planned to flee in the dead of night and urged Liang Feng to join them. But Liang Feng was a timid man. He ultimately refused. In the end, his fears had borne out. When the 2 deserters were captured several days later, their bodies had turned black, a horrific sight. Liang Feng had been terrified out of his wits. He no longer had any doubts as to whether the poison was real. The cave was spacious, but there was nothing to do beyond guarding it. With time, his days began to blur. He could no longer remember what month or day it was. All he could do was stand numbly on guard, hour after hour. Today was no different. Though big names had arrived one after another, including many famous figures and first-class masters from the Jianghu, they had nothing to do with Liang Feng. As for the Zuoyue and Jiejian bureaus, he had no idea what they were. He only knew to obey his orders and stand at his post outside the kitchen. At this hour, there was no one working inside. Liang Feng yawned and struggled to stay awake, leaning against the stone wall. He blinked as a figure walked toward him out of the gloom. At first, he took her for a kitchen maid, but he soon realized this wasn't so. The girl was tall and walked slowly, her head lowered. She looked ill, and when she came close, he caught a faint whiff of medicine. "Halt!" called Liang Feng without any real wariness. The saber at his waist remained sheathed. "Who are you?" "I'm one of Feng Niang's maids, sir. She isn't feeling well, and she asked me to boil some water for her." Her voice was low and hoarse, her long hair spilling onto her shoulders and hiding her ears. Liang Feng couldn't get a clear view of her in the low light. He could only sense the meek submissiveness she was giving off in waves. "We can't light the stove until it's time to cook," he said automatically. "But Feng Niang's is demanding it. If I don't bring her hot water, she's sure to punish me," the maid pleaded. She extracted a silver hairpin from her hair and pressed it into Liang Feng's hand. "Please, sir, do me this favor." Liang Feng knew something about Feng Niangzi and had once had the good fortune of glimpsing her. He'd never seen anyone so gorgeous in his life. Her beauty was beyond what he could put into words. Whether she was the type to punish her maids harshly, he didn't know, but money was useless here. He pushed the hairpin back toward the maid. "It's orders from above. Go complain to them." Only the fact that he was speaking to a woman, and that it'd been a long time since he'd last conversed with anyone at all, kept him from snapping in irritation. "Are you from Liaoling, sir?" the maid asked unexpectedly. "How did you know?" Liang Feng knew his Chinese was accented with the dialect of his hometown. "I'm from Liaoling as well. I came here with Feng Niangzi." The maid immediately switched into his native dialect. How long had it been since he'd last heard the familiar tones of his home? And now here he was, hearing it from a stranger. Liang Feng was momentarily stunned, overcome with the urge to cry. After exchanging a few pleasantries, things grew much warmer between them. He learned that the maid had angered Feng Niangzi and been sent to fetch water after a whipping. Liang Feng felt a pang of sympathy. "How about this?" he said reluctantly. "Go boil some water, and I'll keep an eye out for you. No one will be around for a while anyway. But don't dawdle." The maid thanked him over and over, then ducked inside, one hand trailing along the wall for support. After a quarter of an hour, she struggled back out with a pail of water. The girl staggered a few steps and collapsed beside Liang Feng, almost spilling the water she'd taken such pains to boil. As Liang Feng helped her up, she pleaded tearfully, "May I trouble the gentleman to take the water to Feng Niangzi? I promise I'll put in a good word for you with my lady. I'll ask her to bring you along when she leaves." At this, Liang Feng wavered. He knew Feng Niangzi and the other big shots were here for a meeting and would leave in a few days. Liang Feng was a nobody. If Feng Niangzi asked the steward for him, the steward would have no reason to refuse. He could be free of this suffocating, lightless place. "When you take the water to her," the maid urged, "make sure to say a few words for yourself. That way, Feng Niangzi will remember you when I praise you to her later." Liang Feng had previously only felt sympathetic. Now he genuinely wished to help. He took the pail. "You can rest here for a while. Wait for me to come back." The poor man had no idea as he set off down the corridor that behind him the maid was smiling slightly as she watched his retreating back. Nor did he know that this maid didn't speak only Liao Ling's dialect. She could speak a few sentences in any dialect he could think of, and he certainly had no idea that his moment of kindness would indeed ultimately lead to his own escape. The only thing that wasn't an act was Tsway Boo-qoo's feebleness. Fortunately, Fah You-in and Feng Xiao had treated his wounds, and the internal energy they'd channeled into him had worked its magic. Even getting out of bed would have been difficult otherwise, let alone staggering alone with only the wall for support. Once Liang Feng was out of sight, Tsway Boo-qoo took a moment to catch his breath before slowly getting to his feet. He hobbled into the kitchen, splashed lamp oil on everything, and tossed a torch onto the waiting stack of firewood. Flames roared up. Tsway Boo-qoo dashed out of the kitchen, pouring a trail of lamp oil as he went. The fire leapt ravenously after him. The blaze soon grew beyond the kitchen, consuming everything in its path. There was no water nearby. Once the fire grew large enough, dousing it was a fool's dream. The guards nearby smelled the smoke almost immediately. Finding the fire already out of control, they turned and ran towards safety. Tsway Boo-qoo slipped inconspicuously into the panicking crowd. The night pearl's glow was faint, and the air was thick with smoke. No one noticed anything strange about the tall maid in their midst as they fled in all directions, just as he'd expected. Feng Xiao had mentioned the pavilion leader was arriving today for an important discussion with his directors. Once he caught wind of the chaos here, he'd surely rush over to stabilize the situation. If Tsway Boo-qoo was quick, he could take advantage of the commotion and leave to look for the Zhejiang Bureau forces, then rush back and capture all the leaders of the 13 floors of Yuanhai in one fell swoop. He was walking a bit too fast. Pain lanced through his chest again, and the sheer agony forced him to stop. His hair came free and scattered down his back, long and disheveled. The cave was chilly, but sweat trickled down his forehead. Tsway Boo-qoo had pushed himself too hard. His injury was flaring up again. Soon his neck and back were likewise drenched, damp strands of hair clinging to the nape of his neck. He looked positively wretched. The pain flooding him made him yearn to pass out, but his dwindling awareness forbade it. Vision blurring, he held the stone wall in a crushing grip, using the sting in his fingertips to clear his mind. Feng Xiao. The name rose unbidden. Tsway Boo-qoo slumped against the stone wall in a daze, unable to go on. He could only wait for the pain to pass. As the agony reached its peak, his thoughts shattered into sharp fragments. He couldn't think. All that leapt to his mind was a handsome face, willful and flamboyant. He slowly put it together with the name. Yes, Feng Xiao was probably here as well. But he was crafty and adapted with ease to unfavorable circumstances. Tsway Boo-qoo needn't worry about him. Tsway Boo-qoo, on the other hand, had to leave as soon as possible. If he fell into enemies' hands now, everything he'd done would be in vain. At this thought, he reluctantly straightened up again. Only then did he realize he was drenched in sweat. Even his palms were soaked, leaving a dark smear on the stone wall. The flare-up had sapped him of strength. His head felt dizzy, his feet shuffling forward unsteadily, as though he was stepping on clouds. He squeezed his eyes shut as he waited for the discomfort to pass. In his distress, he entirely failed to realize that someone had come up behind him. Yet, even if he had turned, he couldn't have escaped. This person moved like lightning. In the blink of an eye, he was inches away from Tsway Boo-qoo. His hand fell lightly on Tsway Boo-qoo's shoulder, and Tsway Boo-qoo turned despite himself. It really is you. There was a sinister edge to Yuan Sansi's voice. You were responsible for this fire, too? Tsway Boo-qoo knew without looking that 5 finger-shaped bruises had printed themselves into his shoulder. His muscles and bones were probably damaged from Yuan Sansi's grip, but compared to the agony burning like fire in his chest, this newly inflicted injury was nothing. On the contrary, the sharpness of the pain pulled some of his focus back from the haze. Yuan Sansa, your childhood sweetheart, Lady Yu. The Yu family who were so kind to you, even your position as commandery governor of Boiling, none of these hold any value for you. Tsway Boo-qoo coughed a few times, then rasped. The only thing you care about is the 13 floors of Yuan. Am I right? You are, said Yuan Sansa. I knew someone like you would understand me best. Romantic passions only hinders us. To give your heart to someone else is to lose yourself. You become incapable of moving forward, and the position of commandery governor is only a temporary cover, no more. Don't worry, I won't kill you today. In honor of the years I shared with your mother, I'll take you to see the pavilion leader. He can decide how to deal with you. Despite his gentle words, he grabbed Tsway Boo-qoo's collar and wrenched him forward, with no more care than if he was a mere object. Tsway Boo-qoo staggered along in his grip. His wound seemed to have reopened, and the agony was unbearable. Tsway Boo-qoo never begged for mercy or screamed in pain, but even he couldn't hold back a low moan. Yuan Sansa sneered. He reached out with his free hand and grabbed Tsway Boo-qoo's chin, yanking his face up. He scrutinized it carefully. The pavilion leader is a virtuous man. He's never lusted after women, nor does he ever show undue interest in his enemies. And then there's Feng Xiaolian. He was willing to risk himself to save you. When I look closely at your face, you really do resemble your mother. Mind a blur, Tsway Boo-qoo listened hazily as Yuan Sansa spoke. It took a moment for those words. He even risked himself to save you, to register. Confusion creased his brow, as if he was trying very hard to understand. Yuan Sansa abruptly released him. Without his support, Tsway Boo-qoo slumped to the ground. What are you doing? Yuan Sansa's angry shout sounded in Tsway Boo-qoo's ears as he exchanged blows with someone new. Their flying figures entwined in the dim light, palms interweaving. True qi exploded outward, the shockwaves lashing the nearby Tsway Boo-qoo. Tsway Boo-qoo fumbled a porcelain bottle from his lapels. Feng Xiao had taken this bottle from him, yet it somehow reappeared in his pockets. He tipped out several pills and swallowed them without a closer look. Now he was certain it was Fah You-in who'd removed the guards at his door, as well as the people who should have been in the passage leading to the kitchen. He'd wanted the fire. Fah You-in! Have you betrayed the pavilion leader? Yuan Sansa cried in fury. He assumed Fah You-in was sentimental about his disciple and had intervened to save him, but Fah You-in's every move was made with killing intent. Tsway Boo-qoo heard Fah You-in shouting at him. Feng Xiao and Yushu are both looking for you. They probably fell into the Ursa Major twin jade array. The array was full of traps, and martial arts lost its potency within its confines. If Yushu was more familiar with the array than Feng Xiao, the deputy chief would be in great danger. Perhaps the pills had some effect. Tsway Boo-qoo found his chest wasn't quite as painful as it had been. At Fah You-in's words, he panted and managed to stand. Then he began stumbling and staggering toward the exit. Chapter 122. Tsway Boo-qoo had seen Feng Xiao at his most wretched. Back when Feng Xiao had insisted on leaving Liugong City to save Peijingjia, Tsway Boo-qoo had been suffering the effects of incense of helplessness and resigned himself to being dragged along. Despite knowing they were walking into a trap, they had rushed to the meeting location and, as expected, landed in hot water. They'd had no choice but to take temporary shelter in a cave and wait for reinforcements. Even so, Tsway Boo-qoo hadn't thought Feng Xiao fully at the end of his rope, and certainly not primed for slaughter. If Hooah had returned for a match, it would have been hard to pick a winner. Feng Xiao was a narcissist, obsessed with himself. He'd never make his own life difficult. Though he often took pleasure in annoying Tsway Boo-qoo from time to time, made a show of affection. Tsway Boo-qoo had always viewed their relationship as a collaboration between rivals. When they worked together, it was with a strict goal in mind. If Feng Xiao mocked him or threw him to the wolves, Tsway Boo-qoo had no qualms about returning the favor. And when they did cooperate, No further words were needed between them. They worked quickly and decisively. When Feng Xiao had betrayed him, Tsway Boo-qoo had calmly computed his gains and losses. When Feng Xiao stopped Yushu and stabbed Tsway Boo-qoo himself, Tsway Boo-qoo hadn't been upset in the slightest. He'd known it was their only option. Afterward, he'd serenely agreed with Feng Xiao's claim that his hand had been forced. Until that moment, Tsway Boo-qoo had been solely focused on escaping. He knew Feng Xiao would never put himself in danger, but this time, he was wrong. Not only had Feng Xiao failed to leave, he'd returned to look for him. Why would he do that? Feng Xiao had absolutely no reason to come back. Yet, what Tsway Boo-qoo was most wrong about was himself. He could have ignored Fah You-in's words and simply left. He'd have to pass through the Ursa Major twin jade array, but since Fah You-in was the creator, Tsway Boo-qoo was confident he knew it well enough to traverse it without running into either Feng Xiao or Yushu. Outside, the Zhejian Bureau was waiting to help them. If he extricated himself and ordered them to watch the cave entrance, even if they failed to capture the powerful fighters like Yushu and Yuan Sansa, they'd at the very least sweep up the stewards and guards. Perhaps they'd even manage to snag Lin Yong or Ning Shuo. They would be a massive step closer to taking down the 13 floors of Yuanhai. Conversely, if he went to look for Feng Xiao now, and Yushu managed to find him first, Tsway Boo-qoo would be in grave danger. He made his way to the entrance of the array in stops and starts, thoughts racing like a spinning carousel. All of them were cold and rational, urging him not to worry about Deputy Chief Feng. He should leave first and think later. If they were to wander the array, even a costly victory might be too much to ask of his ailing body. He would likely crumble before he found Feng Xiao, even without the aid of Yushu. What insane notion had gotten into that fool's head this time? Why would he return to look for Tsway Boo-qoo? Tsway Boo-qoo sighed. He could feel his own searing breaths. When he touched his forehead, his palms seemed to burn with alarming heat. He no longer had the energy to curse Feng Xiao aloud, so he cursed him over and over in his mind. His legs felt as if they were tied to a millstone, and a chilly breeze whipped his face and scattered the scorching heat of his breath. He shivered. Finally, he stood on the edge of the array. Another step and he'd enter it. If he wanted to escape, he should go around to the other side so he could pass through safely. Tsway Boo-qoo hesitated just a moment, then stepped forward. Feng Xiao, it seemed, had underestimated Fah You-in. After getting a general summary of the array from Tsway Boo-qoo, he'd thought he could trap Yushu. Instead, things had spiraled out of control. Yushu wasn't the only one trapped. Feng Xiao was as well. There shouldn't have been any lights in the array, yet the occasional flame leapt into the sky and the faint glow of fireflies flickered into existence. If he was rash enough to approach them, he was guaranteed to fall into a trap. He'd already had several close calls. The first time, the array had almost scrambled his mind. The next, he'd nearly been discovered by Yushu. Each was searching for the other as they sought a path out of the array, yet they were also trying to avoid being ambushed by their adversary. They crept forward inch by inch, yet seemed only to circle back to the same spot over and over again. Even Feng Xiao was beginning to feel fatigued. Yushu's hidden weapon was taking effect, suppressing Feng Xiao's internal energy. Feng Xiao's energy was plentiful, but it wasn't infinite. He had to keep it circulating to fend off the cold of the array while staying on guard against Yushu. At the same time, he was keeping an eye on the needle inside his body. If he remained trapped like this, a single fate awaited him. It was cold consolation that, as far as he knew, Yushu wasn't doing much better. Feng Xiao already injured the monk in his previous battle. Unless Yushu escaped the array, it would eventually wear him down, and he'd perish. Feng Xiao had no desire to die with him. The path forked ahead, separated by 3 boulders. He was almost certain he'd seen this exact place not long ago. Frustrated, Feng Xiao realized he was going in circles. He'd taken the left path last time. So this time he took the right. The further he walked, the colder the air became. A faint glow emanated from deep within the fog. Light was more likely to mark a trap than an exit. Feng Xiao felt no relief. Instead, he slowed his pace. Without warning, a group of people rushed toward him through the thick and icy fog. At the front was Ming Yue, the third chief of the Jiejian Bureau. When he caught sight of Feng Xiao, his honest face lit up with joy. "Harlong!" He strode over with his men. "I finally found you. You left such vague messages. If I hadn't met Tsway Boo-qoo, I would never have spotted the entrance to this place." Feng Xiao blinked. "Tsway Boo-qoo got out?" he asked slowly. "Yes. He said you were still inside and asked me to bring reinforcements. Thank goodness we found you. Let's go. We should leave first and talk later." Ming Yue stretched out a hand and pulled him over, but Feng Xiao flinched back. Ming Yue's hand closed on nothing. He looked at Feng Xiao in confusion. "Do you know the way out?" asked Feng Xiao. Light glinted in Ming Yue's eyes. "I do. Tsway Boo-qoo showed me." Feng Xiao's lip curled. He struck at Ming Yue without another word. "What are you doing?" Ming Yue was stunned. He couldn't avoid Feng Xiao's palm brimming with internal energy and took the blow head on. There was a bang like a clap of thunder, and the wind from the strike scattered the surrounding fog. Ming Yue and his men crumbled into a fine powder. Feng Xiao snorted coldly. The Jianjie Bureau had always acted on his orders. Ming Yue wasn't the type to overstep his authority. If Feng Xiao had yet to make his decision, Ming Yue wouldn't push him. On top of that, this was a terribly complex array. Feng Xiao refused to believe Ming Yue could learn its solution with just a few words from Tsway Boo-qoo. It could only be another illusion. He'd already encountered several such illusions since entering. They blurred the boundaries between time and space, leaving Feng Xiao unable to tell how long he'd been trapped. He could neither see nor touch the enemy. Never before had he been in such a predicament. Yet he was the one who'd willingly stepped into the array. Feng Xiao was at the end of his patience. At this point, he'd prefer to run into Yushu and Yuan Sansa. 2 against 1 would still have been better than drifting about in the mist like this, wandering in endless loops. At the thought, he sensed someone approaching from behind. They were still some distance away, perhaps several boulders back. But Feng Xiao noticed them immediately. Those footsteps were too heavy to be Yushu's. Another illusion? No. Feng Xiao stood motionless, quietly waiting for the newcomer to approach. His hands flexed within his sleeves, ready to kill at a moment's notice. The smudge of a figure appeared from behind the boulder, moving toward him through the fog. Whoever it was appeared to be holding an orb of glowing green, most likely a night pearl. But that figure, those clothes, they were in complete contradiction. Feng Xiao narrowed his eyes, watching the figure struggle forward, holding onto the stones for support. At last, they stopped a short distance from him, as if waiting for him to come meet them. Feng Xiao sneered and obliged. A slight shift of his feet, and he was right before them, striking out with his palm. The strike was largely a feint, and with internal energy behind it. An illusion of condensed mist would dissipate the moment his hand connected, but this time his palm met a warm body. The newcomer quaked and staggered back into the boulder behind him, spitting out a mouthful of blood. As warm blood splashed over the back of his hand, doubt finally surfaced on Feng Xiao's face. "It's you." Hoping to confirm his guess, he stepped forward and caught the body. It was solid. He grabbed the person's face for a closer look. A hint of surprised joy colored his face. "It's really you." Chapter 123. Only when Tsway Boo-qoo's warm body was in Feng Xiao's embrace did Feng Xiao truly believe it was him. Then he remembered he'd struck him. Tsway Boo-qoo suffered from all sorts of ailments at the best of times, and he'd been stabbed in the chest not long ago. Though his organs, muscles, and bones were unharmed, he'd lost a large quantity of blood, and his vitality was greatly affected. In his current state, he'd never live long enough to die of old age. Despite Feng Xiao's natural belligerence, he was forced to admit that most of Tsway Boo-qoo's injuries were more or less his fault. "Are you all right?" The moment it was out, he realized it was the stupid thing to ask. Even so, he couldn't stop himself from voicing another foolish question. "Why did you come into the array?" He already knew the answer and was even secretly pleased about it, yet he still wanted to hear it from Tsway Boo-qoo's own mouth. Feng Xiao mused that he'd never acted so brainless before. His soul seemed to have split into two. One half watched his idiocy coolly from the sidelines, while the other couldn't stop the words from tumbling out. He grabbed Tsway Boo-qoo's wrist and channeled internal energy into him. Tsway Boo-qoo finally shifted and spoke, his voice so hoarse it was nearly inaudible. "Don't ask stupid questions." He was already here. What was the point of asking if he was all right or why he'd come? It was a waste of time, an indisputably idiotic thing to say. Deputy Chief Feng was never happy to lose a spat. Normally, he'd have already fired back a teasing retort. Tsway Boo-qoo had been ready to be interrogated over why he'd overestimated his abilities and gone running into the thick of battle to rescue him. But to his surprise, Feng Xiao answered with a low hum and said nothing more. The arms around Tsway Boo-qoo tightened as internal energy continued to pour into his body in an almost reckless flood. Tsway Boo-qoo was a little disturbed. Privately, he wondered if Fungar had suffered brain damage from wandering in the array too long. No matter how abundant his internal energy, he couldn't sustain this level of output. Tsway Boo-qoo's chilled body slowly thawed in Feng Xiao's arms. The pain in his shoulder from Feng Xiao's palm strike faded as well. It was so comfortable he didn't want to move, yet he struggled to grab Feng Xiao's wrist. "That's enough. Let's get out of here." Feng Xiao ignored him. Only when he was satisfied that he'd given enough energy did he stop. "Your teacher's arrays seem to be a bit more complex than what you described." "Obviously. He's the original designer. It's hardly surprising it's evolved over the years." Tsway Boo-qoo coughed twice. The congestion in his throat seemed to have eased a little. By sheer coincidence, Feng Xiao's palm strike must have cleared the blood pooling in his chest. "Where's Yushu?" "He's in the array too, and equally confounded, I imagine. If you can hold on a little longer, I want to finish him off before we leave." Every additional moment Tsway Boo-qoo spent in the array would do him harm. Most people would leave as quickly as possible after finding the person they were seeking, but Tsway Boo-qoo nodded without protest. The feeling of being so helpless held in another person's embrace was not one he liked. He was unused to it. He steadied himself within Feng Xiao's arms and stood up straight, then pushed Feng Xiao away. Feng Xiao grabbed his wrist. "You came here to look for me, right?" Feng Xiao's tone was a little strange, neither teasing nor sarcastic. Unable to read him, Tsway Boo-qoo frowned. "No," he said tartly, then shook off Feng Xiao's grip. But he heard Fungar chuckle, as if amused by the insincerity of his answer. Tsway Boo-qoo was baffled. He looked at Feng Xiao like he was a fool, then turned around and began walking. True to its name, the Ursa Major Twin Jade Array contained two arrays, one large and one small, with the latter nestled within the former. With Tsway Boo-qoo as their guide, they walked toward the heart of the array as freezing winds wailed and sent powerful gusts funneling between the borders. They were chilled to the bone, yet they could see lights and shadows dancing before them like flickering mirages. The clang of armor and weapons rang endlessly in their ears, confusing their senses. Even a powerful martial artist like Feng Xiao felt his heart pound and his vision swim. Yet following Tsway Boo-qoo, they avoided the sinister winds and never stepped into another trap. Still, he didn't know the array inside out. He walked a few paces, then stopped, every step seemingly taken only after great thought. As they reached the edge of the stone forest, a bright light shone before them. It seemed the exit was in sight. Outside the cave, rain fell in a drizzling curtain. and in the sliver of sky above, they could make out a dense shroud of dark clouds. To anyone who'd been trapped in the array, this dreary scene meant freedom. This so-called exit was almost guaranteed to be a trap, yet after brief hesitation, Tsway Boo-qoo stepped through it. Cold air brimming with murderous intent rushed toward him from both sides. A hand yanked his collar just in time, sending him staggering backward as several steel arrows missed him by a hair's breadth. The arrowheads clanged as they collided. Feng Xiao tossed Tsway Boo-qoo behind him, one-handed, the other reaching for his zither strings. Buzzing with true qi, the strings pulled taut in midair and blocked the next wave of ferocious arrows. It was just enough. Feng Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo spun aside, and the iron arrows flew impotently forward to clatter on the ground. Fah You-in, that old bastard, Feng Xiao said in displeasure. He had bad intentions from the start. He wants to use us to vanquish the 13 floors. If we die in the process, he'll have killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Tsway Boo-qoo's expression was placid. He wasn't remotely surprised. Even if this isn't the real exit, we're not far. Let's find it and wait there. If Yuan wants to leave, he'll have to pass through. With that, he pushed Feng Xiao away. Yet to his surprise, Feng Xiao offered no resistance. He stepped back and slumped against the boulder, then slowly sat down. Tsway Boo-qoo looked at him, confused. Feng Xiao sighed. I can't walk any further. Let's rest a bit. Why push ourselves? Maybe Yuan sat down to have a snack too. No. Tsway Boo-qoo's first thought was that Feng Xiao was up to some new mischief. Still, he crouched down and touched his forehead. No fever. Feng Xiao grabbed his hand. Stop filling me up, Taoist Master Tsway, he drawled. The corners of Tsway Boo-qoo's mouth twitched as he tried to gently yank his hand back and failed. Now you're the one filling me up. How many times were you going to cop a feel if I hadn't grabbed your hand? Asked Feng Xiao. Don't tell me you wouldn't have touched me again. There are so many who lust after my venerable self. How could I fail to see your ulterior motives? If you've taken a fancy to me, just say so. I might even consider accepting your feelings. What the hell was he on about? Tsway Boo-qoo was used to the casual vulgarities that spilled out whenever Fungar ran his mouth, but it wasn't like him to fool around at such a critical moment. A thought occurred to him. Are you injured? Nonsense, Feng Xiao spoke in the same lazy tone. How could I be, unparalleled martial arts that I am? Don't think you can take advantage of me just because it's dark in here. I won't let you have your way. He yanked the crouching Tsway Boo-qoo toward him and grabbed the back of his head to keep him from standing up. A palm blast from behind blew past Tsway Boo-qoo. It narrowly missed him, thanks to Feng Xiao. Foiled, Yuan had no choice but to step out from his hiding place and face Feng Xiao head-on. Tsway Boo-qoo was shoved aside as Feng Xiao and Yuan fell straight into battle. Yuan must have been there for some time, spying on them and waiting for an opportunity to strike. He'd been out for blood from the moment he heard Tsway Boo-qoo say they weren't far from the exit. His presence hadn't escaped Feng Xiao's notice. He'd merely been waiting for Yuan to show his face. True Qi rose in towering waves between the two combatants, answering the yin energy within the array like a war trumpet and drawing in the cold, dark air all around them. Yuan and Feng Xiao were unaffected, protected by their internal energy, but Tsway Boo-qoo felt a freezing wind buffet his face. The air streamed in through his nose, and a tightness seized his chest. He instantly became nauseous and started coughing with discomfort. The sound of his wheezing seemed to remind Yuan of something. Deputy Chief Feng, he sneered. Did you not discover the needle inside your body? He wove through the fog, as quick as a shadow melding into the gray mists. As he circled, he moved with the flow of yin energy, seeking out his chance to attack. He obviously hadn't wasted his time while trapped, but had discovered some of the rules of the twin jade array. Yuan's words confirmed Tsway Boo-qoo's guess. His heart sank, and he strained to make out Feng Xiao's figure within the fog. His attacks remained fierce and decisive, but the more fierce and decisive he was, the more certain Tsway Boo-qoo felt that something was wrong. It was Feng Xiao's style to nettle his opponents. He never let up until they were hopping with rage, yet now he was silent. Perhaps Yushu hadn't noticed, but Tsway Boo-qoo saw it instantly. Feng Xiao had no energy to spare for chatter. What can I do? Tsway Boo-qoo thought. He looked around, frowning. Yushu remained on the defensive, patiently parrying Feng Xiao's strikes. He was in no hurry to end this. Feng Xiao's approach appeared to be the opposite. The winds from his palm strikes were more cutting than the yin-infused gales within the array. His every move brimmed with bloodlust as he flashed between forms, too quick to see. Yushu dodged an attack to his front, only for Feng Xiao to vanish into thin air. A moment later, he reappeared at Yushu's side and slammed a palm toward his chest, shattering the protective barrier of true qi around him. Yushu spat out a mouthful of blood, his eyes wide with alarm. But Feng Xiao didn't take the chance to press him. Instead, he paused. At once, Yushu understood. Rather than fleeing to nurse his injury, he stepped forward, laughing. A small dagger shot from his billowing sleeves, and he grasped the hilt. Focusing all his energy into the blade, he slashed at Feng Xiao's head. A fight between master martial artists never lasted long. The first glimpse of the enemy's weakness spelled life or death. A moment ago, Yushu had been fearful. Now, he advanced full of confidence, unwilling to retreat. The tables had turned in a split second. He was sure of his judgment and grateful to the pavilion leader. If not for his gift of the needle, Yushu might never have gained the upper hand over Feng Xiao. True qi surged into the blade. At that moment, even the yin-infused winds shied away from its edge. One slash cleaved them in two, and they wrapped around the dagger as it whistled toward Feng Xiao. Feng Xiao leapt back, but his movements were slower than before. If the blade connected, it might not behead him, but it would slice his chest open at the least. Wherever it fell, it would put him half in his grave. But the blade whizzed past. Feng Xiao's figure vanished into the mists as the dagger struck stone instead of flesh. The blade's qi splashed out on either side, shattering the floor of the tunnel with a resounding rumble. Yet Feng Xiao was nowhere in sight. Yushu was stunned. He swept his furious gaze to the side. Sure enough, Tsway Boo-qoo had disappeared as well. Tsway Boo-qoo dragged Feng Xiao through the array, swerving and dodging far too nimbly for an ailing, injured man. In contrast, Feng Xiao staggered as he walked, then went limp without warning. He slumped against Tsway Boo-qoo, almost knocking them both to the ground. I need to remove the needle first. I can't move even half my body anymore, Feng Xiao said through gritted teeth. He'd never imagined Yushu's hidden weapon was so powerful. He'd thought he could suppress it until they escaped, but the moment he'd drawn on his internal energy during the fight, the silver needle had begun to weave through his body with his qi, and he'd almost collapsed on the spot. Tsway Boo-qoo didn't say much either. He tugged Feng Xiao over to the stone wall and forced him to sit. I used some of the stones to mimic the twin jade array and made a smaller array. So now it's a triple jade array. But a little trick like that won't buy us much more time. Yushu will be able to break out with brute force. Hurry up, he urged. You, help me. Feng Xiao grabbed Tsway Boo-qoo's shoulder and pulled him down, little by little, to sit beside him. He balled his other hand into a loose fist. Press my Guanyuan acupoint. Use moderate force. The Guanyuan acupoint lay 3 inches below the navel. Tsway Boo-qoo had some medical knowledge, but he lacked practical experience. He felt his way toward Feng Xiao's navel and carefully measured out a distance of 3 inches. Feng Xiao couldn't take his dallying. He grabbed Tsway Boo-qoo's hand and tugged it downward. Right here. Press on it with one hand and don't let go. Move your other hand up along the Zhen Mai meridian, just above it. Don't stop until I say so. Tsway Boo-qoo didn't think twice. He quietly did as he was told. With Tsway Boo-qoo closing off the Zhen meridian for him and stopping the needle from moving around, Feng Xiao gathered his energy to expel it from his body. But it was as if the needle realized it was under threat. It buzzed restlessly and tried to flee into the blood pumping through his veins. Feng Xiao's face paled. He pursed his lips and squeezed his eyes shut, his usual teasing smile replaced with cold severity. Tsway Boo-qoo's eyes were trained on Feng Xiao, watching for any change in his expression. In a sense, he and Feng Xiao were birds of a feather. Both of them were enormously determined, willing to do whatever it took to reach their goals. Feng Xiao normally concealed that determination beneath a veneer of carelessness. Yet right now, Tsway Boo-qoo felt that the grave look on Feng Xiao's face was much more pleasing to the eye than his usual blithe smiles. Feng Xiao shuddered. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth and he slumped forward. "How is it?" Tsway Boo-qoo caught him and wrapped an arm around his shoulder, guiding him down to lean his forehead against the crook of Tsway Boo-qoo's neck. "Not so good, I'm afraid," said Feng Xiao weakly. "Hold on just a little longer. The exit is right in front of us." Tsway Boo-qoo didn't waste any time. He was tugging Feng Xiao's arm over his own shoulders to pull him up when Feng Xiao stopped him. "Even if we get out, we don't know if the Zhejiang Bureau will find us before the 13 floors do. If we run into the pavilion leader, I don't like our chances." "What's the point of saying all this now? Save your breath and escape first." Tsway Boo-qoo admonished him hoarsely. Yet before he could move, he heard a soft sigh in the darkness, and something warm pressed against his lips. Chapter 124. Tsway Boo-qoo had weathered many dangers in life and crawled back from the gates of hell more than once. He was neither God nor immortal. It was impossible for him to foresee everything. Even so, he'd never been like this, struck dumb and stunned, as rigid as a block of wood. Within the darkness of the array, the mist had yet to disperse. The winds wailed, and the cold fog drifted thick around them. Perhaps there were eyes out in the dark, watching and waiting for the perfect chance to strike. Yet Feng Xiao paid none of it any heed. He took advantage of Tsway Boo-qoo's sluggish reaction and grew more forward, catching Tsway Boo-qoo's wrists and twisting them behind his spine, pushing their torsos flush together. Cold stone was at Tsway Boo-qoo's back, yet the unmistakable heat of a blazing body was pressed to his front, searing even through his clothes. The contrast was like the stark line separating yin and yang, or the heavens from the earth. For several moments, Tsway Boo-qoo was frozen stiff. A look of shocked disbelief was etched into his habitually inscrutable features. He'd even forgotten to moderate his gaze, and his eyes bored into Feng Xiao. His mind roiled with chaos and confusion as his thoughts cycled between, "This man has gone mad," and, "This Feng bastard has gone into a chi deviation after failing to expel the poison." Which it was, he had no idea. Displeasured with his distraction, Feng Xiao bit down hard on his lip. It was a new injury on top of old. Tsway Boo-qoo's thoughts were dragged back to the pain he'd been in when he'd woken up, and his eyes narrowed. "So it was you!" Feng Xiao had anticipated Tsway Boo-qoo would struggle and easily subdued him. Last time he hadn't had the chance to explore, but now he could finally indulge to his heart's content. Finding the taste enjoyable, he transformed into a beast that had snared its prey, first trapping it in his arms, then luxuriating in the satisfaction of his catch. He wasn't surprised when his prey resisted. He grabbed Tsway Boo-qoo's hand and wrote one character on his palm. "Endure." Tsway Boo-qoo abruptly fell still. Feng Xiao knew he must be remembering one of the last times they'd kissed like this. Back in the Western Khaganate, Tsway Boo-qoo and Feng Xiao had pretended to be cut-sleeves to mislead and win over the first prince. They'd pawed and groped each other right in front of Prince Yishun's servant. Tsway Boo-qoo almost certainly thought the same thing was happening now, that Feng Xiao hoped to trick Yishu into dropping his guard, proverbially luring the snake from its hole. Feng Xiao laughed to himself. It was true he wanted to lure out Yushu, but more than that, he wanted to make up for his own regrets. He'd missed his chance to go farther last time, so this time he wouldn't stop halfway. If Feng Xiao could profit at someone else's expense, he would. That had always been his style. Tsway Boo-qoo had stopped struggling, but his body remained as stiff as a wooden puppet as Feng Xiao kissed him over and over. Feng Xiao's breath came in waves, crashing over him like seawater as they slowly eroded his boundaries. Eyes stubbornly open, Tsway Boo-qoo glared. In his heart, he'd already cursed Feng Xiao's ancestors back to the beginning of time. Part of his frustration came from the way his body responded to Feng Xiao's. Impossible to control. Part of it was that he refused to be the submissive one. Only his rational mind stopped him from slapping Feng Xiao away. Yushu still hadn't appeared. What was he doing? Hadn't it been long enough? And why was this Feng bastard's tongue so long? Wait. What was he? Some demon from hell? It was practically lodged in his throat. Wasn't this a show they were putting on for Yushu? Did he need to go this far? Feng Xiao was almost shaking with laughter, his body trembling as he tried to hold it back. He'd never imagined Tsway Boo-qoo could be so cute. He'd told him not to move, and he really wasn't moving. But he couldn't laugh. He'd picked up an enormous windfall, and if he smiled, all his efforts would go to waste. Considering Tsway Boo-qoo's tendency to hold grudges, he'd remember this for the rest of his life. Behind them, there was indeed an eye watching this scene unfold. The owner of the eye was a handsome man. If he wished, he could fill his smile with enough love and compassion to wipe all the cruelty from the world. But since the loss of his eye, the bloodlust in his heart had broken through the prison of his neat facade. Like a wild beast set free in the mountains, it could no longer be tamed. Instead, it rampaged through him, unleashing all the savagery, hypocrisy, and ruthlessness within. He loathed those who'd driven him to this point. He hated powerful people, and he hated people who sat at the top luxuriating in their glory even more. The two men in front of him just happened to be both. Cautiously, Yushu quieted his breathing. He watched from a distance as Feng Xiao attempted to heal himself, waiting for the opportune moment. It wasn't time yet. If he was patient just a little longer, if he could wait until the moment the needle was about to be expelled, then Feng Xiao would be at his most vulnerable. Only by striking at precisely the right moment could he be certain of killing Feng Xiao. With Feng Xiao dead, it didn't matter how cunning Tsway Boo-qoo was, he would meet the same fate. Suddenly, Yushu's eyes widened, and he almost gasped aloud. At first, he thought he was seeing things, but as he watched, those two figures pressed together. Feng Xiao's movements were unmistakable. Yushu and Princess Tianjin had also once embraced with only the moon and flowers as their witness. They'd sworn vows to each other, and he had promised to rescue her from a political marriage. Only then could she truly be free. He looked back at Feng Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo. Their great enemy was here, yet those two weren't they at all concerned about their lives? How could they still be in the mood for a tryst? Yushu almost burst out laughing. So that's how it is. That's how it is. The Jiejian and Zuoyue bureaus, two pillars of the power of the imperial court. To think their leaders shared such a filthy and shameful relationship. Despite their pretense of being at each other's throats, the Feng Shui pair were in secret collusion. If Yang Jian and Dugu Qieluo knew, would they be happy to listen to their advice? To trust them? Had Yushu still been the Prince of Jin's counselor, he'd have turned and left without a word. He'd have gone straight to the Prince of Jin and told him this secret, grasped their weakness tightly in his hands, and used it as blackmail. But he had nothing left. Tsway Boo-qoo had exposed his identity, and the Prince of Jin had cast him out. Tsway Boo-qoo and Feng Xiao had even managed to ruin the 13th floor's secret gathering. Yushu's fingers tightened around the dagger in his hand. When he moved, it was so fast he seemed to become one with the mists. The dagger slid from his sleeve as he charged, piercing toward them like light on rippling water, like an arcing rainbow. His mind entered a state of perfect clarity. In that moment, he understood everything. He broke through the bottleneck that had kept him from advancing in his martial arts. Even if I stand at the edge of a cliff, I will look ahead without fear. My blade follows my lead, traveling where my heart demands. This was a speed no mortal could match. If only he'd grasped this move 10 years earlier. Then even a 1,000-strong army couldn't have stopped him from stealing the princess away to a place where no one could find her. No matter what her wishes were, he could have spent a lifetime waiting for her to understand. If only he'd grasped it back in the royal yurt during his decisive battle with Feng Shouw, then he could have at least felled his enemy. But he only now grasped it. Why now? Resentment blazed within his heart, disrupting the rhythm of his breathing. The rest happened in an instant. The dagger pierced Feng Xiao's back. Yushu felt his true qi split open Feng Xiao's flesh, felt the blood spurt from the wound to spray over the upper half of his face. No! Yushu stopped. It wasn't blood that had struck his forehead. It was the needle, Liao Yan Shui Po. Was that why Feng Xiao hadn't moved until now? Had he been waiting for him to strike the entire time? Without thinking, Yushu's hand rose to his brow to check. In the twinkling of an eye, Feng Xiao leaned forward and smoothly flicked a hand behind him. A zither string infused with dark wind shot at Yushu. Yushu still had his dagger in hand, flying forward. It was certain to pierce Feng Xiao's back, but at the same moment, the zither string would slit Yushu's throat. Should he perish with Feng Xiao or step back and preserve his life? Hindered by his distraction, the blade lost its momentum. Morale was a tricky thing. It might be high at the decisive moment, but it could collapse the minute one's passions waned. The instant Yushu lost the all-consuming desire to kill Feng Xiao, he was destined to fail. He reeled back, and the dagger retreated with him. Feng Xiao took the chance to turn, his billowing sleeves raised like a great rock spreading its wings as he swooped down from above. Yushu turned on his heel and fled, but it was too late. The zither string was shooting forward like an arrow springing from its bow. Brimming with qi and cloaked in the yin-infused wind, it streaked through the air with a mournful whistle. A scarlet line materialized on the back of Yushu's neck. The crimson thread spread rapidly until it was a necklace of blood carved deep into his flesh. Yushu's legs sprinted onward, but his head had already parted from his body. It tumbled to the ground, frozen in an expression of shock and anger, as if unable to believe his death had come. The bloody string fell beside his head, just like its victim, crashing down from soaring heights. When Yushu had first appeared in service of the Prince of Jin, he'd possessed the aura of an enlightened monk, handsome, gentle, and full of silent compassion. He'd drawn the admiration of many ladies in the capital. Yet today, Buddhist Master Yushu and all his bright prospects had died in this dark and sunless cave. It was a miserable end. Feng Xiao heaved a long sigh of relief. He reserved no sympathy for his enemy, but as a fellow warrior, he'd sensed Yushu's breakthrough at the end. He hadn't had time to consider it at such a critical moment. He'd had to trust his intuition and strike. If he'd been a fraction slower or more careless, the man lying dead on the ground would be him. A cough came from behind him as Tsway Boo-qoo rose. You seem quite well now, Deputy Chief Feng. Shit, thought Feng Xiao. He coughed twice, then clutched his chest and fell forward. He intended to slump against Tsway Boo-qoo again, or for Tsway Boo-qoo to reach out and support him. Instead, Tsway Boo-qoo stepped aside. This man was unbelievable. Feng Xiao couldn't actually throw himself on the ground, so he smoothly caught himself on the nearby stone wall to save himself from embarrassment. I think Yushu's dagger nicked me. I'm a bit dizzy. Please check if it was poisoned, he said feebly. Tsway Boo-qoo hummed. Let me take a look. He stepped behind Feng Xiao and slapped him hard on the back. Feng Xiao almost hacked up a lungful of blood. He coughed violently and without pause. This time, it wasn't faked. Vexed, he said, Is this how you treat your savior? It looks to me like you've been suffering from excessive internal heat lately, Deputy Chief Feng, said Tsway Boo-qoo tonelessly. You've probably gone without the attentions of a woman for too long. I was simply trying to dispel some of the heat for you. It's really too intense. How about I give you another slap? Feng Xiao sputtered a laugh. His anger dissipated like smoke, and he sighed. I fear this heat will be hard to cure. Look at the mediocre masses out there. Who could be worthy of my esteemed gaze? Forget women. To me, even Feng Xiaolian, a ruinous beauty capable of toppling nations, is merely another woman whose looks will fade with time. Form is emptiness, as they say. All things are void. He paused deliberately and looked Tsway Boo-qoo up and down. Only a certain sickly invalid is barely passable, he said pointedly. Another man might have been moved, but Tsway Boo-qoo's expression remained blank. He stared at Feng Xiao for a long time, then said coolly, Back in the Western Cognate, it was necessary to win the first prince's trust. I had no choice. Today, you used me as bait for Yushu. Consider us even. There won't be a next time. His brow was heavy with fatigue, but his gaze was as sharp and clear as ever, as if it could pierce all the schemes of the world while standing detached and unaffected, beyond the red dust of the mortal realm. He said no more after that, but turned and left, looking for the way out. Feng Xiao followed a few paces behind. There wouldn't just be a next time, he thought. There'd be a time after that one too. You wish to remain a bystander, aloof and unmoving, but I wish to drag you into that red dust, sending you tumbling until you're feathered and phoenixed down. I want you unable to detach yourself ever again. Well, you guys, we have just finished reading chapters, I think, 117 through 124 of Peerless, Volume freaking 4, the opening chapters. Whee! Man, I have been wanting to read this so bad. I think that's one of the things I hate about wanting to read something so bad is whatever I'm reading before it just doesn't make it as amazing. Which, don't get me wrong, I am really enjoying Devil Venerable Also Wants to Know, but my heart has been soaring the entire time I've been reading this over the weekend to have it published for you guys on Monday. And so now we're going to go over my notes, but I want to just start with what we just ended with, and that is Yushu being defeated by Feng Xiao. First off, I have to say that I think it's really cool that he had enlightenment, but it was also funny because it was like, it's just a little too late, a little too long. Anyway, that was random, but it was too late. And he completely fell for the scheme that Feng Xiao had set up, even though Feng Xiao was also indulging himself. And he ended up losing his head. Not to mention, I do like the way that Meng Xi Shi actually wrote that scene out. I've read a lot of the other scenes in here, of course, up through this volume, and they were okay, but I still felt like the battle scenes written in Thousand Autumns were a lot better. But I have to say, even though this one was, short-lived, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, all of the fights, as it said somewhere in one of these chapters, fights between martial artists is, they're short. So anyway, but I liked this one. Now we can go to the top of my notes. I just wanted to say that before I forget about the end things we just read. The other thing I'll say before I go to my notes, actually, it's just that little ending part in the echo of his mind, basically saying, like, no, Cui Buqu, you want to detach yourself from me, but baby boy, best believe I am going to win you over, essentially, is what he's saying. So that was quite interesting. So the first thing I want to talk about is page 11, where Cui Buqu is basically thinking about his life choices when it comes to his journey with Feng Xiao and realizing that, oh, he really did in some kind of way build a form of trust with Tsway Boo-qoo. And number one, I personally think it was cool that he had that realization. And I guess I'm saying that because as a reader, I'm happy to know that he'd given some trust. Because, I mean, even in all this time, if y'all are getting back at each other and, you know, having sharp tongues, that doesn't mean that there's not some kind of bond that's forming between you two. And so that made me happy to know that, yeah, he was putting some trust in Feng Xiao. And we know that as the story, as these chapters went, it was okay for him to put his trust in Feng Xiao because Feng Xiao made sure to take care of him. Like, even after he stabbed him, he made sure that he did not stab him in fatal spots, essentially. Or they still could have been fatal if no one helped. But of course, Fang Yuan was there. Fang Yuan was definitely going to. So we're good on that. Then we're going to go to page not 1, to 15 because we have kiss number 2. Actually, no. I'm sorry. Technically, would it be kiss number 3? No, kiss number 2. Yes. When it said, when Tsway Boo-qoo had his eyes closed or whatever, and it said, you know, this kiss was different from his previous heartless teasing, talking about Feng Xiao, but he really wasn't even thinking. He just leaned forward and put his lips against Tsway Boo-qoo's, and that was just... He was terrified because it said it was done on pure instinct. And I was like, yes! Oh my gosh! But speaking of Feng Xiao, and that whole progression, I guess really starting there, but I'm going to talk about pages 25 through 26 because I absolutely loved that Meng Xi Shi took the time to write out his thought process and basically like, what in the world? Like at first he started off by saying, and I highlighted it, to be cursed with the misfortune of falling in love with a man like this. The crimes of one's past life must have been unforgivable. And then he just like kept going in his mind, thinking about everything, only to finally realize, you know, on page 26, when we get to that point, how could a man as perfect and peerless as himself fall in love with an invalid who was practically on death's doorstep? And then, so it was just nice to like go through his thought process. Like, there's no, anyone who loved this man is crazy, essentially, or cursed. And then thinking like, I could do better. Like, what? He's not even that impressive. Only to be like, damn, yeah, I'm in love with Tsway Boo-qoo. But also it's laughable. He knows it's laughable because he's like, if anyone else hears this, they're gonna be like, dude, stop playing around. So anyway, next thing I want to talk about is actually Fan Yuan. Let me just say, I am glad that he is not truly part of the 13 floors of Yuan High. That is a nice little twist. Not a sharp twist. I'll call it like a soft twist. Like something that's not shocking. Like, okay, that could be expected. To know that, okay, so he's not on Feng Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo's side, but he's also not on the 13 floors of Yuan High side. So now my question is, their question as well, who the heck's side is he on? But I'm grateful for Fan Yuan in the moment because he played a crucial part in getting, you know, Tsway Boo-qoo out of that situation. So we're good to go because Tsway Boo-qoo would have been destroyed if Yuan Sansa was able to take him away to the leader. Which, who the heck is the leader? I'm ready for us to find out. We're in book 4 and I want to know. The other thing I wanted to say, because apparently I have it written down here, during the live Q&A that I had, someone had asked what was the easiest voice for me to do. And at the time I had said Yan Wu Shi because I had watched the Donghua like 3 times, and I even listened to the audio drama, and so I had his voice clear in my head. But I have to say, voicing Feng Xiao is very easy for me as well. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Anyway, I think it's hilarious that Tsway Boo-qoo loves trouble, and he knows that he loves trouble, and it was nice that he was the fire starter causing on the trouble. But yeah, I just really love that Meng Xi Shi takes out the time to write out her characters' internal struggles or thought processes, whatever they're going through, and it sounds like different characters. Like, she doesn't sound like she's writing for the same person over and over again. You can tell a difference even like in their tone, because Feng Xiao's tone when he was going through his struggle was very, like full of himself essentially. But like, no way I could be in love. The heck? And then even going to Yushu's thought process, his was very, I would say, like cold and calculated and just reflecting on what he coulda, woulda, shoulda. And even reflecting on Tsway Boo-qoo's thought process when he was like, wait, what? Feng Xiao came back for me. Why the heck would he do that? He never puts himself in trouble if he doesn't have to. Why would he do that? Like, okay, hold on. Let me make this make sense. Very logical point of view. So I think she did a good job, and the translator also did a good job at showing the shifts in tone between each character and their thought processes. Beautiful. Next thing I want to talk about is, well, I put needle in Feng Xiao. That's very vague, Kamaria. I don't know what I was supposed to say on that. I was not happy about it. Oh, yes, that's what I was going to say. For the first time, we got to see Feng Xiao actually struggle. That was quite interesting. And I wasn't here for it. Not at all. I don't want Feng Xiao to struggle. No, just fine. It was fine. It's okay. So the very last thing that I wanted to say, because when Feng Xiao was kissing Tsway Boo-qoo, he had taken Tsway Boo-qoo's palm and written the word endure in it. And so I figured, because it's been so long since I've given one, at least it feels like it, let me tell you guys how to say endure, because I actually randomly know this one. It's Yuan. So R-E-N, and remember, you're not gonna, you can, I suppose, say Ren, just a regular R, but you want to kind of put like a Y-Z-H-ish type sound in front of it, so like a Z almost, Zhen. Sorry, well that's Zhen as in person, people. But you're doing the third tone, so the vocal fry, Zhen, endure, Zhen, Zhen. Anyway, that is all. Please let me know you guys' thoughts and comments on this juicy 2-hour filled reading. There was so much. So I can't wait to see you all's thoughts and reactions in the comment section. The other thing I want to go ahead and make you guys fully aware of is that my Patreon is now active. And the link to it is in my description. Now, the thing I want to say, as the post that I put up this weekend said, it is launching officially on August the 4th. That is when the first official Remnants of Filth video will be put out, while you YouTubers will get it on August the 11th. Anyway, but I just wanted to let you know that it's up, so you can go there, and if you are someone who wants that unfiltered version, the uncut Danmei, when we come up on smut and stuff, you can just join for free for the time being, and then when August comes, you're more than welcome to subscribe. And to my surprise, I've already had a few people that have subscribed, and I do see now there are a couple of people who have just become free members. So they've read the post and they are waiting. So please make sure you guys read, because I don't want y'all looking like, oh my gosh, why is there nothing happening on the Patreon? And I just paid $3 or $4. Someone pledged $10, which made me so happy. It's because it's live, but it hasn't launched. I just want to give you all plenty of time. And for those who don't know what the advantages of the Patreon would be, number one, you're going to have 1 week earlier access to all of the readings. So again, when we start reading Remnants of Filth, the Patreon's going to get it on Monday, August the 4th. Meanwhile, the YouTubers are going to get it Monday, August the 11th. The other thing is we will do 2 live reading sessions a month. They are going to be on Saturdays. I'll give more time and stuff on that based off the poll that was done a while ago. And yes, full access to all of the smut NSFW content when it comes up. I'm not going to always be reading smut, but the point is, when we read books that have smut, you get full access if you're on Patreon, whereas on YouTube, you'll get the edited version. So, again, the link is in my bio. I thank all of you who have already signed up. You guys are so kind. It's so sweet, but I know you have expectations. And thank you to those who will sign up in the future. I'm super pumped. Let's do this. And, well, Me.Mimo.